Hey, I'm happy you're here. These good night stories are meant to help you rest and clear your mind. Let them play while you relax or drift off. If you want more nights like this, subscribe. It's completely free. And don't forget to leave a good night comment so others feel welcome too. My boyfriend kisses me and says he loves me every morning before work, and it's making me want to end things. I never thought I would be the kind of person who could get pushed away by something that sounds so sweet on paper, but here I am sitting in my apartment with my stomach in knots because my boyfriend kisses me good morning and tells me he loves me before he leaves for work. I'm 27 and my boyfriend is 29. I'll call him Logan. We've been together a little over a year and we moved in together about 4 months ago. We both work normal weekday jobs. I work hybrid, so some mornings I'm home and some mornings I'm out the door early. Logan is always out the door early because his commute is longer. At the start of our relationship, I honestly loved how affectionate he was. He was the first guy I dated who didn't act like showing love was embarrassing. He would hold my hand in public. He would put his arm around me on the couch. He would text me that he missed me. I remember thinking, wow, this is what it feels like to date someone who actually likes me. I grew up in a family where emotions were treated like inconveniences. My dad was not a bad man, but he was cold. My mom was always stressed and snappy. Nobody said I love you in my house unless it was a big moment, like someone leaving for college or someone crying. I learned early that the safest way to exist was to not need anything from anyone. I became the friend who listens, the daughter who handles things, the girlfriend who doesn't ask for reassurance because I don't want to be seen as clingy. Logan is the opposite of me in a lot of ways. He's warm. He's expressive. He's the kind of person who thanks servers and smiles at strangers and asks me how I'm feeling and actually waits for the answer. That's part of why I fell for him. It felt like being in the sun. The morning thing started when he began staying over more often. He would get up first. He would brush his teeth and get dressed. Then he would come back into the bedroom and lean over me while I was half asleep and kiss my forehead or my lips. He would whisper, "Love you, babe," and then grab his keys and leave. It was small and routine, and it felt intimate. Then we moved in together, and it turned into a daily ritual. Every single morning. Even if we had a weird night. Even if we argued the night before. Even if I'm sleeping, and he has to wake me just enough to get the kiss. He does it like it's a rule of the universe. Kiss. Love you. Door closes. And for the last 2 months, it has been making me feel something I hate admitting. It makes me feel trapped. I don't mean trapped like he's abusive or controlling. Logan is not those things. I mean trapped like my body reacts as if I'm being cornered by closeness that I didn't ask for in that moment. I tense up. My heart starts going fast. Sometimes I pretend I'm still asleep because I don't want to perform a reaction. Sometimes I feel annoyed at him before I'm even fully awake, which makes me feel like a monster. The worst part is, I can't even point to anything he's doing wrong. He's being loving. He's being consistent. If I describe this to anyone in my real life, they'd probably tell me to stop self-sabotaging and to appreciate what I have. I can already hear my friends saying, "Girl, do you know how many men won't even text back and you're upset because yours kisses you?" I've tried to tell myself it's fine and I should just accept it. But it's not just a small irritation anymore. It's turning into dread at night because I know the morning kiss is coming. And then I feel guilty because what kind of person dreads a kiss from someone who loves them? I started noticing I feel this way in other moments too. Like if he reaches for me randomly in the kitchen and hugs me from behind and I'm not expecting it. Or when he says "I love you" in the middle of a normal conversation. I say it back, but it feels like I'm reciting lines in a play. Sometimes I feel like I'm watching myself from outside my body and thinking, why can't you just be normal and receive love like a normal person? I've dated guys in the past who were distant. Guys who would go a whole day without talking. Guys who were allergic to commitment. I thought that was what made me anxious back then. I thought if I ever dated someone stable, I'd relax. But now I'm dating someone stable, and I feel like I'm going to crawl out of my skin. I can tell Logan is starting to feel something is off. He's not dumb. The last week I've been flinching a little when he leans in. I try to hide it, but he notices. He asked me one morning if I was okay because I seemed tense. I lied and said I was just tired. He looked at me with this concerned expression and kissed my forehead anyway and said love you and left. After that, I sat up in bed and felt like crying. Not because he did anything bad, but because I could see myself hurting him, eventually. And the thought of hurting him makes me sick. I keep going in circles about whether this means I don't love him. Because if I loved him, wouldn't I want the kiss? Wouldn't I want the affection? Or is this one of those things where love is there, but my wiring is messed up and I'm reacting to closeness like it's danger? I've been reading online about avoidant attachment and intimacy issues, and it all hits way too close. The descriptions of people who feel suffocated by normal relationship stuff. People who crave connection but panic when they actually get it. It felt like someone had been watching me my whole life. Here's the part that makes me feel even more insane. Sometimes the kiss feels good. Sometimes I melt into it. Sometimes I want it. And I'm happy. But then if he does it again the next day, my brain goes no, no, no. It's like the more consistent he is, the more my body wants to rebel. There was one morning recently where I had to be up early for a meeting. I was already dressed and in the kitchen making coffee. Logan came up behind me and wrapped his arms around me and kissed my cheek. He said, "Love, you have a good day." It was sweet. It was normal. And I felt this flash of anger, like he was taking something from me by claiming that moment. I'm ashamed even writing that. He wasn't taking anything. He was just being loving. But I felt invaded. And that's when the thought popped into my head for the first time. Maybe I should break up with him. Not because he's bad, but because maybe I'm not capable of being with someone like him. Maybe I need someone less affectionate. Maybe we're incompatible. He deserves someone who lights up when he kisses them instead of someone who feels like they're being tested. But then I think about a future without Logan, and I feel hollow. I like our life together. I like cooking dinner with him. I like how he talks about wanting kids someday, and how he looks at me like I'm already part of his plan. I like how safe I feel when I'm sick, and he brings me water and checks my temperature like I matter. So why does a kiss in the morning make me want to run? I tried one small experiment. A couple weeks ago, I told him I was having trouble sleeping and asked if he could let me sleep in the morning. He said, of course. Next morning, he got ready quietly and didn't wake me. But right before he left, he still leaned down and kissed me anyway. He tried to be gentle, but it woke me. He whispered, "Love you," and left. I stared at the ceiling and felt that same panic. It wasn't the waking up that bothered me. It was the fact that even when I asked for a boundary, he couldn't fully not do it. I don't think he meant to ignore my request. I think in his mind he was being considerate by keeping it soft and quick. But it made me feel like my needs don't count as much as his ritual. That thought made me angry, and then I immediately felt guilty because his ritual is about love. How do you tell someone, stop loving me in that way? How do you say I need you to not be so consistent because it freaks me out? I know the obvious answer is talk to him. But every time I try to imagine the conversation, I freeze. I imagine his face falling. I imagine him thinking I'm rejecting him. I imagine him stopping all affection entirely out of fear of bothering me. Then I imagine myself missing it and feeling abandoned. I can't win in my head. I also have this fear that if I say something, he'll realize I'm too broken and he'll leave. Which is ridiculous because I'm the one contemplating leaving. But that's how my brain works. It would rather I be the one to run first so I don't have to feel rejected. I'm also worried that this is a deeper issue and not just about the morning kiss. Like maybe this is about moving in and feeling like my space is no longer mine. Maybe it's about commitment getting real. Maybe it's about me realizing that being loved means being seen, and I'm not used to being seen. When I picture ending it, I feel relief for a second, and then grief right after. Relief because I wouldn't have to navigate this constant push-pull in my body. Grief because I'd be throwing away someone who is genuinely good to me. I don't want to paint Logan as perfect either. He has his flaws. He can be stubborn. He can get defensive if he thinks he's being criticized. He's the kind of person who believes love solves everything, which is sweet, but also sometimes dismissive. If I'm upset about work, he'll go into problem-solving mode and then get frustrated if I just want to vent. But overall, he's a good partner, which is why I feel like the villain in my own story. I'm asking because I honestly don't know what's normal here. Is it reasonable to ask my boyfriend to stop kissing me and saying I love you in the morning before work? Is it cruel? Is it a sign I'm not in love? Is it a sign I need therapy? Is it a sign we're incompatible? I've been sitting with the question of whether I want to end the relationship, and I can't tell if that feeling is my intuition telling me this isn't right, or if it's my fear trying to sabotage something stable. The kiss is such a small thing, but it has turned into the symbol of everything. It's like every morning I'm being reminded that I'm in a committed relationship and someone expects closeness from me, and my body reacts like I'm about to be swallowed whole. If I tell him to stop, I'm scared he'll feel rejected and it will change how he sees me. If I don't tell him I'm scared, I'll start resenting him for something he doesn't even know he's doing. And if I break up with him without trying to talk it out, I'll always wonder if I ruined something good because I couldn't handle being loved. Update: my boyfriend kisses me and says he loves me every morning before work, and it's making me want to end things. I ended up talking to Logan because it got to the point where I was starting to feel tense the moment I heard his alarm, and I hated who I was becoming in my own head. I tried to pick a time that wasn't right after one of the morning kisses because I didn't want it to feel like I was reacting in the moment or punishing him for something. So I waited until a normal weeknight after dinner when we were both relaxed. We were in the living room, and he was half watching something on TV and half scrolling on his phone, and I kept rehearsing it in my head like I was about to confess to a crime. I started with telling him I love him because I do, and I needed him to know that right away. I told him I've been struggling with feeling overwhelmed by affection sometimes, and that it isn't about him doing something wrong, and I know how confusing that sounds. I told him I didn't grow up in an affectionate home, and sometimes my body reacts like closeness is pressure, even when my brain knows it's love. He put his phone down immediately, and he looked serious in this very focused way he gets when he thinks something matters. He asked me if he's been making me uncomfortable, and I could tell from his voice that he was trying not to sound hurt. That made my throat tighten, because the last thing I wanted was to make him feel like some kind of creep for being sweet. I told him the truth, that it's mostly the morning thing, and how it feels like a ritual that happens no matter what, and sometimes I wake up already bracing for it. I told him I've been pretending to be asleep sometimes, because I don't know how to say no without sounding like I'm rejecting him. I admitted that I've been spiraling and even wondering if we should break up because I felt like something was wrong with me, and I didn't want to make him feel unwanted forever. That was the first time he actually looked visibly hurt. He didn't yell or anything, but his eyes got glassy, and he rubbed his face with his hands like he was trying to reset his brain. He asked me if I don't love him the way he loves me. He asked me if I've been lying when I say it back. He asked if I feel trapped living together. I told him I mean it when I say I love you, but sometimes the moment feels forced when I'm not ready for it, and then I feel guilty, and I overthink it, and it snowballs. I told him moving in has been mostly good, but it also brought up stuff for me about not having my own space and feeling like I can't control when I'm touched, even though I know he isn't doing it to control me. I told him I'm not proud of it, but my body reacts before my mind can catch up. He got quiet for a long time. The TV was still on, but neither of us was watching it. Then, he said, he thought the morning kiss was his way of making sure we never leave the house angry at each other, because his parents had a bad divorce, and he grew up hearing them slam doors and leave for work without speaking. He said in his head, the kiss was like a promise that even if we had a weird night, he was still choosing me. That made me feel like I got punched in the chest, because I realized we were both doing the same thing from opposite directions. He was trying to protect the relationship with consistency. I was panicking because consistency feels like losing control. I told him I understood why he does it and I appreciate the intention, but I need it to be something I consent to in the moment and not something that happens automatically. I said I want to be able to say not right now without it turning into a whole emotional event. I told him I'm not asking him to love me, less I'm asking him to love me in a way that doesn't make my nervous system freak out. He asked what that looks like. I said I think I need him to ask in the morning like, "Can I kiss you before I go?" Or "Are you up for a hug?" And if I say no, he can just say "love you" and leave without touching me. I also told him I need him to stop kissing me when I'm asleep because even though it's sweet, it makes me feel like I don't get a choice. Saying that out loud felt dramatic, but it was the clearest way to explain it. He nodded and said okay. Then he asked me something that surprised me. He asked if I'd be willing to go to therapy because he doesn't want me living with that level of panic, and also because he doesn't want to accidentally become someone I dread. He said he wants to be close to me, but not at the cost of me feeling unsafe in my own home. I started crying right there because it was the first time I felt like he wasn't taking it personally in a defensive way. I told him yes, I'll go, and I probably should have gone a long time ago. The next morning was the first test. I woke up to him moving around, and for a second, my body did the usual brace. Then he came into the bedroom, but he stayed standing near the door instead of leaning over me. He said softly, "Hey, I'm heading out. Can I kiss you? Or do you want to sleep?" I hesitated because my instinct was to say no, just to prove I could. But I actually wanted to say yes in that moment. So I sat up and kissed him, and it felt normal. It felt like my choice. The weird part is after he left, I still felt emotional, but it wasn't panic. It was relief and also sadness, because I realized how long I've been walking around with this belief that if someone wants me too much, it means I'm about to lose myself. It hasn't been perfect since then. There have been a couple mornings where he asked, and I said I'm not up for it, and he looked disappointed for half a second before he covered it. He still said "love you" and left like he promised. I could tell it took effort. I also noticed that when I said no, I felt this urge to chase him and fix it and be like, "Wait, actually kiss me," because I didn't want him to feel bad. That was new for me because I realized I'm not just avoidant, I'm also terrified of causing anyone else discomfort. Later that day, I brought it up and told him I noticed his face change, and I'm not mad, but I need us to be honest about it. He admitted it stings a little because physical affection is how he feels connected, and he worries that me saying no means I'm pulling away. He also admitted he's scared that if he stops initiating, then we'll drift. I told him I can't promise I'll never say no, but I can promise I'm not rejecting him as a person. I told him I'd rather have fewer moments that are fully mutual than daily moments that make me feel obligated. I also suggested we build connection in other ways so it doesn't all sit on the morning kiss like a pressure point. Like having a real goodbye when we're both awake, or checking in at lunch, or planning one intentional cuddle time on the couch at night where I'm actually present instead of flinching. We also talked about the kitchen hugs and the random touches. I told him I don't want him to stop being affectionate altogether because I actually like it when I'm in the right headspace. I just need a little warning sometimes. So we tried something simple, where he says coming in for a hug or he taps my shoulder first. It sounds silly written out, but it helps. It gives my brain a second to get on board. The biggest thing is I finally told him the part I was most ashamed of, that sometimes affection makes me feel trapped, and then I get angry at him internally for needing me. He didn't react like I expected. He said he appreciates me telling him, because it explains why I go distant right after good moments. He said he also has his own stuff, where he uses affection to soothe his anxiety, and he didn't realize he was placing that on me every morning. So right now we're still together. I don't feel like I'm about to break up today. I feel like we're actually dealing with the real issue instead of letting it turn into resentment. I also feel embarrassed that I let it get so big in my head before I said anything, but I guess that's kind of my pattern. I haven't started therapy yet, but I called my insurance and I'm looking for someone who deals with attachment stuff and anxiety. Logan said he'd go with me if I want couples counseling too, but he also said he supports me doing individual therapy first because this is tied to my history and he doesn't want me to feel like it's all on our relationship. I still don't know what this means long term. I don't know if I'll ever be the person who wants that kind of routine affection every day. But I do know that asking for consent in small moments already changed the way my body feels in the mornings. It made the kiss feel like love again instead of a test I had to pass. Stories number 2. My brother went ballistic when I told him I can't babysit his kids anymore, and now the whole family is divided. I never thought I'd be writing this, but I need to get this off my chest because I'm losing my mind over here and nobody in my family seems to understand where I'm coming from. For context, I'm a 28-year-old woman living in Portland and I work remotely as a graphic designer. My brother Ethan is 35 and has 3 kids with his wife Monica. They're 9, 6, and 3 years old. Their names are Tyler, Bella, and Little Jackson. Ethan and Monica live about 15 minutes away from me in the suburbs, and for the past 2 years, I've been their go-to babysitter whenever they need someone to watch the kids. It started out innocently enough. Monica's mom used to help them out a lot, but she moved to Arizona to be closer to her sister about 2 years ago, so when they needed someone for date nights or emergencies, they'd call me. I love my niece and nephews, I really do, and at first I was happy to help out because family is important to me, and I figured it was just occasional stuff. The first few months, it was maybe once or twice a month. I'd come over on a Friday or Saturday evening, put the kids to bed, watch some Netflix, and they'd be home by 11 or midnight. It was honestly fine, and I didn't mind at all. But then, it started becoming more frequent, like every single weekend, and then it turned into weekday evenings too. They'd text me the day of, or sometimes just a few hours before asking if I could watch the kids, and because I work from home, they just assumed I was always available. I tried to be understanding because I know parenting is hard and everyone needs a break, but it was starting to eat into my personal time, and I never felt like I could make plans anymore because I didn't know when they'd need me. My boyfriend Derek started getting frustrated because we'd have to cancel dinner reservations or movie plans last minute because Ethan would call saying it was an emergency and they needed me right away. The breaking point came about 6 weeks ago when they asked me to watch the kids for a whole weekend, like Friday evening through Sunday afternoon, because they wanted to go to Napa Valley for Monica's birthday. I had already told them 2 weeks prior that I had plans that weekend. Because Derek and I were supposed to go camping with some friends, it was something we'd been planning for over a month. But Ethan called me on Wednesday that week, practically begging, saying they'd already booked the hotel and the wine tours, and Monica was really looking forward to it. He said their regular backup sitter had canceled on them, and they were desperate. I felt so guilty that I actually canceled on Derek and our friends. Derek was really upset about it, but I convinced myself it was just one more time, and family comes first. That weekend was absolutely exhausting. Tyler had a soccer game on Saturday morning that I had to take him to. Bella had a birthday party that afternoon. And Jackson was going through some kind of phase where he'd only eat chicken nuggets and would have a complete meltdown if you tried to give him anything else. By Sunday afternoon, I was completely drained. And when Ethan and Monica finally came home around 6 in the evening, they were all relaxed and happy. Monica was even a little tipsy still. I was expecting at least a thank you, or maybe they'd offer to take me out to dinner to show their appreciation, but instead, Ethan just said thanks sis and handed me $40. $40 for an entire weekend of childcare? I didn't even say anything about the money because I was too tired to argue, and honestly, I wasn't even doing it for money in the first place. But the lack of appreciation really stung. After that weekend, I started thinking about how much of my life had been consumed by babysitting duty. I calculated that over the past year, I'd probably babysat at least 3 times a month on average, sometimes more. And I'd canceled on my own plans countless times. Derek and I had been talking about taking a trip to Hawaii, and I realized I couldn't even commit to booking it because I didn't trust that Ethan wouldn't need me and make me feel terrible for not being available. I was also starting to feel resentful, which I hated because I love those kids, but every time my phone rang and I saw Ethan's name, I'd feel this knot in my stomach. So 2 weeks ago, I decided I needed to have a conversation with him about boundaries. I rehearsed what I was going to say and tried to think of the nicest way to explain that I needed to cut back significantly on the babysitting. I invited Ethan out for coffee on a Tuesday afternoon and told him I needed to talk to him about something important. When we sat down, I explained that I loved spending time with Tyler, Bella, and Jackson, but that the babysitting had become too much and was affecting my personal life and relationship. I told him that going forward, I could only commit to babysitting once a month, maybe twice if it was truly an emergency, and that I needed at least a week's notice unless it was a genuine crisis. His reaction was not at all what I expected. He got this look on his face like I just slapped him and immediately got defensive. He said I was being selfish and that family is supposed to help each other out. He brought up how our parents always helped us when we were growing up and how that's just what you do. I tried to explain that I wasn't refusing to help at all. I was just asking for better boundaries and more notice, but he wasn't having it. He said that Monica and I were close and that this would really hurt her feelings and that the kids always ask for me specifically and would be devastated if I wasn't around as much. Then he pulled out the guilt trip about how they can't afford regular childcare because they're saving for a bigger house and that I'm their only option. I stood my ground though and told him that their childcare situation wasn't my responsibility to solve, that I have my own life and my own relationship to prioritize. That's when he really lost it. He raised his voice in the middle of the coffee shop and said I was acting like spending time with my own family was some huge burden. He said I clearly don't care about them as much as he thought I did and that he's always been there for me when I needed him. I pointed out that I've never actually needed him to do anything even close to the level of what I've been doing for them, and that seemed to make him even angrier. He ended up getting up and walking out, leaving me sitting there feeling like the worst person in the world. Since that conversation, he's barely spoken to me. He'll send one-word responses to my texts and hasn't invited me over to see the kids at all. Monica actually called me a few days after, and she was crying, saying that I blindsided them and that they don't know what they're going to do now. She said she thought we were close and that I was someone she could rely on, and now she feels like she can't trust me. I tried to explain my side, but she just kept saying that this is what family does and that I'm being unreasonable. She even said that if the roles were reversed, she would absolutely help me out without question, which made me feel even worse, even though logically I know the roles wouldn't be reversed because I don't have kids. The worst part is that my parents have now gotten involved. Ethan called my mom and told her his version of events, making it sound like I just completely abandoned them with no warning. My mom called me upset, saying that she's disappointed in me and that she raised me to value family above everything else. I tried to explain that I gave them plenty of notice and that I'm not abandoning anyone, I'm just setting boundaries, but she said that when you love someone, you make sacrifices. My dad has been more neutral, but even he said that maybe I could have handled it better and been more gradual about pulling back instead of just drawing a hard line. Now I'm second guessing everything. My cousin Rebecca, who I'm really close with, says I did the right thing and that Ethan has been taking advantage of me, but she's the only person in my family who's on my side. Everyone else either thinks I'm being selfish or won't say anything because they don't want to get involved. Derek is fully supportive and says my family is being manipulative, but he's obviously biased because this affects him too. I've been losing sleep over this, wondering if I really am being a terrible sister and aunt. Maybe I should have just sucked it up and continued helping out. After all, they are family and the kids didn't ask for any of this. The thing that really gets me is that I feel like I can't even enjoy the free time I now have because I'm consumed with guilt. Last Saturday, Derek and I went to dinner and a movie like we'd been planning, and the whole time I was thinking about how Tyler, Bella, and Jackson were probably asking where I was. Ethan posted on Facebook about having a family movie night and tagged Monica and the kids, but very pointedly didn't include me in any of the photos, which felt like a deliberate message. My mom commented saying how nice it was to see them having family time, which felt like a dig at me too. I'm honestly at the point where I'm wondering if I should just apologize and go back to how things were, even though I know that's not what I want, and would probably end up ruining my relationship with Derek. But the alternative is this ongoing family drama and being painted as the villain, which is also destroying me. I never wanted any of this. I just wanted to have some work-life balance and be able to make plans without constantly being on call. Is that really so unreasonable? I don't even know anymore. Everyone is making me feel crazy for wanting my own life. My friend Ashley, who has kids of her own, said that Ethan and Monica are completely out of line and that they should have been paying me properly and respecting my time from the beginning. She said she would never expect her sister to be available that often without compensation. But then, my Aunt Linda said that Ashley doesn't understand because family dynamics are different for everyone and that in our family, we've always been there for each other no matter what. I feel like I'm going insane because I can't tell if I'm actually being unreasonable or if everyone is just guilt-tripping me. Last night, Ethan sent me a long text message saying that he's been thinking about everything and he still thinks I'm wrong, but that he's willing to forgive me if I apologize to Monica and commit to at least helping out twice a month. He framed it like he was doing me a favor and being the bigger person, which honestly just made me angry all over again, because he's still not acknowledging that he took advantage of me or that my feelings are valid. I haven't responded yet because I don't know what to say. Part of me wants to just give in to keep the peace, but another part of me knows that if I do that, I'll be right back where I started and nothing will change. Derek says that if I cave now, I'll be teaching them that they can guilt trip me into anything and that the boundary pushing will just get worse over time. He's probably right, but it's easy for him to say because they're not his family. I'm the one who has to live with the consequences of either decision. Either I'm the bad guy who doesn't care about family, or I'm the pushover who can't stand up for herself. There's no winning here, and I hate it so much. I just needed to write all this out because I feel like I'm drowning in guilt and confusion. I genuinely don't know if I did the right thing anymore, even though at the time I felt so sure. If anyone has been through something similar or has any perspective, I'd really appreciate it. Because right now, I feel completely alone in this, even though Derek and Rebecca are supporting me. I never thought that asking for basic boundaries would blow up my entire family dynamic, and I don't know how to fix it, or if it even can be fixed. Update. My brother went ballistic when I told him I can't babysit his kids anymore, and now the whole family is divided. I honestly didn't think I'd be back here so soon, but a lot has happened in the past week, and I really need to get this all out because my head is spinning. First off, thank you to everyone who commented on my original post. Reading through all the responses really helped me feel less crazy and gave me the courage to stick to my boundaries even when things got harder. I showed Derek some of the comments, and he was relieved that other people were validating what he'd been telling me all along. But I don't think either of us were prepared for how much more complicated this situation was about to get. So after my last post, I still hadn't responded to Ethan's text message where he said he'd forgive me if I apologized and committed to babysitting twice a month. I was really conflicted about it and spent a few days just sitting with my feelings and trying to figure out what I actually wanted versus what everyone expected of me. Derek and I had several long conversations about it, and he made a really good point that even twice a month was still a significant commitment, especially if they weren't going to respect my need for advance notice. He said that Ethan's message wasn't actually an olive branch, it was just another manipulation tactic to get me back under his control. I decided I wasn't going to respond to that text at all, because anything I said would either be capitulating to his demands or starting another argument, so I just left it on read. That apparently was the wrong move, because 2 days later, Monica showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Thursday afternoon. I was in the middle of a work call when my doorbell rang, and I could see through the window it was her, so I wrapped up my call as quickly as possible and answered the door. She looked upset, like she'd been crying, and she asked if we could talk. I let her in and made us some tea, and at first she seemed really calm and reasonable. She said she understood that I have my own life, and that maybe they had been asking too much of me, which honestly shocked me because I was expecting another guilt trip. She apologized for how Ethan had reacted and said he could be stubborn and defensive when he feels attacked, but that she wanted to find a compromise that worked for everyone. I started to feel hopeful that maybe we could actually resolve this like adults, So I told her again that I was happy to help out once a month with proper notice, and that I'd still be there for genuine emergencies. That's when her whole demeanor changed. She got this look on her face and said that once a month wasn't going to work for them, and that I needed to understand their situation better. Then she launched into this whole explanation about how they're stretched thin financially because they're trying to save for a bigger house and also put money away for the kids' college funds, and how childcare costs in our area are astronomical. She said that if they had to pay for regular childcare, it would be at least $1,500 a month, which would completely derail their savings goals. I sympathized with that, but I also pointed out that their financial planning wasn't my responsibility and that I have my own financial goals too. Monica got really quiet for a moment, and then she said something that absolutely floored me. She told me that the reason they're in such a tight spot financially is because Ethan took a pay cut 6 months ago to move to a job with better hours so he could be more present for the kids, and that they made that decision partially because they knew they could count on me for childcare. Basically, she was saying that they had structured their entire life and financial situation around my availability without ever actually asking me if I was okay with that level of commitment. I didn't even know what to say to that. I just stared at her trying to process the fact that they'd made major life decisions based on the assumption that I would always be available to provide free childcare. Monica must have taken my silence as me softening, because she reached out and grabbed my hand and said that this is why it's so important that I reconsider. Because it's not just about date nights anymore. It's about their entire family's well-being and future. She said that the kids have already been asking why I haven't been around, and that Tyler especially has been really sad about it. I finally found my voice and told her that what she just told me made everything so much worse, not better, because it meant they'd been taking advantage of me even more than I realized. I said that making major financial decisions based on free labor from a family member without discussing it with that person first was completely inappropriate and unfair. Monica's face just shut down and she pulled her hand back. And then she said something that I keep replaying in my head. She said that she thought I was different from other people, that I understood what family meant, and that she'd clearly been wrong about me. Then she got up and left without saying anything else. I immediately called Rebecca because I was shaking and needed to talk to someone, and she was absolutely furious on my behalf. She said that what Monica told me was basically an admission that they'd been exploiting me and that they had no right to be angry that I was setting boundaries. She also pointed out that Ethan taking a pay cut for better hours doesn't even make sense if they're constantly going out and need me to babysit. Like, what exactly are these better hours for if not to spend time with their own kids? That actually hadn't occurred to me, but she was right. If Ethan has better hours now, then why are they still needing a babysitter multiple times a week? I didn't hear anything from anyone in my family for the next couple of days, and honestly, it was a relief. I focused on work, and Derek and I had a really nice quiet weekend together. But then, Sunday evening, my mom called and asked if I could come over for dinner on Monday night, because she and my dad wanted to talk to me. I knew it was going to be an ambush, but I also figured I might as well get it over with, so I agreed. Derek offered to come with me for support, but I told him this was probably something I needed to face alone. I showed up at my parents' house at 6 and immediately knew something was up, because Ethan and Monica were already there sitting in the living room. My mom had set me up. She told me it was just going to be the three of us, but clearly they'd planned some kind of intervention. I almost turned around and left right then, but my dad came up and put his hand on my shoulder and asked me to please just hear everyone out, so I stayed. We all sat down in the living room, and there was this awful tense silence before my mom started talking. She said that family is the most important thing and that we needed to work this out because she couldn't stand seeing her children fighting. Then she basically facilitated what I guess was supposed to be a mediation, but really just turned into everyone telling me why I was wrong. Ethan said that he felt betrayed because he's always thought of us as a team, and now I was abandoning ship when things got hard. Monica said that I clearly don't value my relationship with my niece and nephews as much as they thought I did, and my mom said that she's disappointed that I'm choosing my social life over my family. I tried to defend myself and explain my perspective, but every time I started talking, someone would interrupt me or talk over me. At one point, I raised my voice and said that nobody was actually listening to me and that this wasn't a conversation, it was an attack. And my dad told me to calm down and not be so emotional. That honestly might have been the moment I was most angry during this whole thing, being told I was too emotional when I was literally just trying to be heard. Finally, I just stood up and said I was done. I told them that I had tried to set a very reasonable boundary and that instead of respecting it, they had all ganged up on me and made me feel like a terrible person for wanting my own life. I said that I love Tyler, Bella, and Jackson, but that I'm their aunt, not their parent. And that Ethan and Monica need to figure out their own childcare situation like every other parent in the world. Monica started crying at that point, and Ethan jumped up and got in my face, not like physically threatening, but close enough that it was uncomfortable. And he said that I'm selfish and immature, and that I'll regret this when I'm older and alone, because I pushed away everyone who cared about me. My dad finally intervened and told Ethan to back off, and I used that moment to grab my purse and head for the door. My mom followed me out and caught me in the driveway. She was crying too, and she said that I'm tearing the family apart and that I need to think about what's more important, my pride or my family. I told her that it wasn't about pride, it was about respect, and that if the family can't survive me having basic boundaries, then maybe there are bigger problems here. Then I got in my car and drove home. I was crying so hard, I probably shouldn't have been driving, but I just needed to get out of there. Derek was waiting up for me when I got home, and I just completely broke down. I told him everything that happened, and he held me while I cried. He was so angry on my behalf and said that my family was being emotionally abusive and that I should consider taking a break from all of them, not just from babysitting. Part of me knows he's right, but the thought of cutting off my whole family is so overwhelming I can't even process it. The next day, I was emotionally exhausted and could barely focus on work, but then around 3 in the afternoon, I got a call from Rebecca. She said that my mom had called her, asking her to talk some sense into me, and that when Rebecca defended me, my mom said that Rebecca was being a bad influence and encouraging me to break up the family. Rebecca told her that was ridiculous, and that I was the only one being reasonable in this whole situation, and apparently my mom hung up on her. Rebecca said she just wanted to warn me that the family was rallying against us, and that I should prepare for more people to start calling and taking sides. Sure enough, over the next 2 days, I got calls and texts from my Aunt Linda, my Uncle George, and even my cousin Mark, who I barely ever talked to. All of them basically saying variations of the same thing about how family comes first, and I'm being selfish. The only person who didn't pile on was my grandmother, my dad's mom, who called me and said that she'd heard about what was happening and wanted to hear my side of the story. I told her everything from the beginning, and she was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said that she thought I was doing the right thing and that my parents had spoiled Ethan his whole life, and this was just more of the same. That was honestly shocking to hear, because my grandmother is usually very traditional and big on family loyalty, so the fact that she was on my side meant a lot. She said she was going to talk to my dad and try to make him see reason, but she also warned me that my mom has always had a blind spot when it comes to Ethan, because he's her firstborn. She told me to stand firm and not let them bully me into something I don't want to do, and that I could call her anytime I needed support. Yesterday, something else happened that I'm still trying to figure out how I feel about. I got a Facebook message from a woman named Jennifer, who I didn't recognize at first, but then I realized she's another mom from Tyler's soccer team. She said she'd heard through the grapevine that I wasn't babysitting for Ethan and Monica anymore, and she wanted to reach out because she felt like I should know something. Apparently, Monica has been telling people at the soccer games and school pickups that I had a mental breakdown and became unreliable, and that they can't trust me with the kids anymore. She's literally been lying about me to mutual acquaintances to make herself look like the victim. Jennifer said she wanted to tell me because she thought it was wrong and that people should know the truth. She said Monica had been complaining for weeks about childcare costs and acting like I'd left them in the lurch with no warning. I thank Jennifer for telling me, but honestly, I don't even know what to do with that information. Do I confront Monica about it? Do I try to set the record straight with people? Or do I just let it go? Derek thinks I should confront her, but Rebecca thinks I should just distance myself from the whole situation and let Monica dig her own hole. I'm so tired of all of this. I just wanted to set some boundaries, and instead, my entire life has been consumed by this drama for weeks now. I haven't seen my niece and nephews in almost a month, and I do miss them. But I also know that if I reach out to try to see them, it'll be seen as me backing down. I feel like I'm in an impossible situation where there's no right answer. The thing that keeps bothering me is what Monica said about them structuring their finances around my availability, like how much of their life planning has been based on me being their free childcare, and what else haven't they told me? Derek pointed out that if Ethan really did take a pay cut for better hours 6 months ago, that means they've been relying on me as essentially free childcare for even longer than that, probably since Monica's mom moved away. That's 2 years of building their life around my unpaid labor without ever actually asking if I was okay with that level of commitment long term. I don't really know what I'm looking for by posting this update. Maybe just to vent, because I can't talk to most of my family about it anymore. I'm trying to stay strong and maintain my boundaries, but it's really hard when everyone is telling you you're wrong and making you feel like a bad person. Derek keeps reminding me that their reaction is so extreme because they know they were taking advantage of me and now they're losing their free childcare, and that if I really was in the wrong, they wouldn't need to be so manipulative about it. I guess I'll just keep doing what I'm doing and hope that eventually things calm down, but right now, it feels like this is never going to get better and I'm just going to be the family outcast forever. Thanks again to everyone who commented on my first post. Knowing that strangers on the internet can see how unreasonable my family is being is honestly one of the few things keeping me sane right now. Stories number 3. My friend convinced me to let her stay at my place while I recovered from surgery, and now she won't leave. I'm writing this from my bedroom at 2 a.m. because I can't sleep, and I'm at my absolute breaking point with a situation that has completely spiraled out of control. I genuinely don't know what to do anymore, and I feel like I'm losing my mind. So I'm hoping that maybe writing this all out will help me figure out my next steps, or at least make me feel less alone in this nightmare. For context, I'm a 32-year-old guy living in Denver, and I work as an accountant for a mid-sized firm downtown. I've lived in my apartment for about 4 years now. It's a decent 2-bedroom place that I rent in a pretty nice neighborhood, and up until 3 months ago, I lived alone and honestly loved it. I'm not antisocial or anything, but I really value my space and privacy, and after having roommates all through college in my early 20s, I was really enjoying the freedom of having my own place where I could do whatever I wanted. The person at the center of all this is someone I'll call Vanessa, and we've known each other since high school back in Ohio. We weren't super close back then, but we were in the same friend group and stayed in touch on social media over the years. About 5 years ago, Vanessa moved to Denver too, and we reconnected and started hanging out maybe once every couple months, grabbing drinks or going to concerts, that kind of thing. I always thought of her as a casual friend, someone I enjoyed spending time with, but not someone I was particularly close to or shared deep personal stuff with. Vanessa has always been kind of a free spirit type. She's worked a bunch of different jobs over the years and never seems to stay in one place very long. She was doing gig work for a while, driving for Uber and doing some freelance photography, and she was always talking about her next big plan or idea that was going to change everything for her. I thought it was kind of cool, honestly, like she had this adventurous approach to life that I envied a little bit since I've always been more of a play it safe traditional career path kind of person. So about 4 months ago, I started having these really bad stomach pains that wouldn't go away, and after a bunch of doctor appointments and tests, they determined I needed to have my gallbladder removed. It wasn't an emergency, but my doctor said I should get it done sooner rather than later before it got worse. They scheduled the surgery for early September and told me I'd need to take about 2 weeks off work to recover, and that I should have someone around to help me out for at least the first few days, since I'd be pretty out of it from the anesthesia and pain meds. My parents live in Ohio still, and my dad has some health issues of his own, so I didn't want to ask them to fly out, and my older sister Lauren has 3 young kids and couldn't easily get away. I have a few friends here in Denver, but most of them work regular jobs and couldn't take time off on short notice. Plus, I felt weird asking someone to essentially move in with me for a few days. I mentioned this to Vanessa one night when we were getting drinks about 3 weeks before my surgery, just kind of venting about how I was stressed about the logistics of it all. Vanessa immediately offered to help out. She said she had a really flexible schedule and could totally stay at my place for a few days to make sure I was okay. She said she'd done something similar for her aunt a couple years ago and knew what to expect, and that I shouldn't worry about it at all because that's what friends are for. I was honestly really touched and relieved, and I told her I really appreciated it and would definitely take her up on that. We agreed she'd come stay the night before my surgery and then stay for about 3 or 4 days after, just to make sure I could get around okay and didn't need anything. The surgery was scheduled for a Thursday morning, and Vanessa showed up at my apartment Wednesday evening with a duffel bag and a grocery bag full of what she said were supplies to help me recover. She seemed really upbeat and positive about the whole thing, telling me not to worry and that she'd take good care of me. That night we ordered pizza and watched TV, and she slept in my guest bedroom, which I'd cleaned up and put fresh sheets on for her. The surgery itself went fine. It was laparoscopic, so they just made a few small incisions, and I was in and out the same day. Vanessa picked me up from the hospital Thursday afternoon, and I was pretty loopy from the anesthesia and in a decent amount of pain despite the medication they'd given me. She helped me get settled on the couch and made me some soup and basically took care of everything, which I was really grateful for because I felt pretty helpless. The first couple days after surgery are honestly kind of a blur because I was sleeping a lot and taking pain medication that made me really out of it. Vanessa was great during that time. She made sure I took my meds on schedule, helped me get to the bathroom when I needed it, and generally just checked on me constantly. By Saturday, I was feeling a bit better and more alert, and I told her I really appreciated everything she was doing and that I owed her big time. She just laughed and said that's what friends do and not to worry about it. Sunday, I was feeling well enough to move around a bit more, and I noticed that Vanessa had kind of spread out in my apartment. Like, there were her toiletries all over the bathroom counter, and her clothes draped over the chair in the guest room, and some of her stuff in the kitchen. I didn't think much of it because she was staying there to help me, and obviously she needed her things, but there was something about the way she'd settled in that made it feel like more than just a few days. By Monday, I was feeling significantly better. Still sore and moving slowly, but able to get around and do basic things for myself. I told Vanessa that I thought I'd be okay on my own and that she'd already done so much and shouldn't feel obligated to stay longer. She insisted that she wanted to stay through Wednesday at least, just to make sure I was really okay, and I didn't want to seem ungrateful, so I said that was fine. Wednesday came, and I was definitely ready to have my space back. As much as I appreciated Vanessa's help, I'm not used to having someone in my home all the time, and I was looking forward to being alone again. I brought it up that morning and said something like, "Hey, I think I'm all good now. Thanks so much for everything." And I expected her to start packing up. Instead, she said she'd stay one more night, just to be safe, and would head out Thursday morning. I was a little annoyed, but figured one more night wouldn't hurt. Thursday morning, I woke up around 8, and Vanessa was already up making coffee in my kitchen. I came out and asked if she needed help carrying her stuff to her car or anything, and she got this weird look on her face. She said she actually wanted to talk to me about something, and then she told me that she'd been evicted from her apartment while I was recovering. Apparently, she'd been behind on rent for a couple months, and her landlord had finally had enough, and the eviction notice had come through right before my surgery, but she hadn't wanted to stress me out by telling me. I was completely blindsided by this information and didn't know what to say. She started crying and saying she didn't know where to go and didn't have enough money for a new deposit right now, and that she was so sorry for not telling me sooner. She said she'd been applying for new places, but everything required first and last month's rent plus deposit, and she just didn't have it. Then she asked if she could stay in my guest room for a couple weeks while she figured things out, and she promised she'd be out by the end of the month. I felt so trapped in that moment because I was still recovering from surgery, and she'd just spent almost a week taking care of me, and I felt like I couldn't say no without being a complete asshole. Plus, she was crying and saying she had nowhere else to go, and I felt terrible for her. So even though everything in me was screaming that this was a bad idea, I said okay, but just until the end of September, which was about 2.5 weeks away at that point. Vanessa was super grateful and hugged me and said she'd make it up to me and wouldn't be any trouble at all. The first few days were actually fine. She was pretty quiet and respectful of my space, and she'd cook dinner sometimes, which was nice since I was still not supposed to do any heavy lifting or strenuous activity. But then little things started bothering me, like she'd leave dishes in the sink for days, or she'd use my laptop without asking, or she'd have friends over without checking with me first. By the time the end of September rolled around, I was really ready for her to leave, but when I brought it up, she said she was still looking for a place and just needed a little more time. She said she'd had some interviews for better paying jobs, and once she got hired, she'd be able to afford a new place, and could I please just give her until mid-October? I was frustrated, but I also didn't want to kick her out onto the street, so I reluctantly agreed. Mid-October came and went with the same story. She just needed a little more time. She was so close to getting this job, she'd definitely be out by November. At that point, I started getting more firm with her and said she really needed to have a concrete move out date. And she got defensive and said she was doing her best and that it's not her fault the rental market is so expensive. She made me feel like I was being unreasonable for wanting my own apartment back. It's now been 3 months since my surgery, and Vanessa is still living in my guest room with no signs of leaving. She's working part-time at some retail job, but claims she's not making enough to save for a deposit. Meanwhile, I've noticed she's constantly getting DoorDash delivered and buying new clothes and going out with friends. When I've tried to talk to her about a timeline, she either gets emotional and starts crying about how hard her life is, or she gets defensive and says I'm being a bad friend for not supporting her when she's going through a tough time. Last week I finally snapped and told her she needs to be out by the end of November. No more excuses. She said that's not enough time and that she can't believe I'm doing this to her, especially after she took care of me when I needed help. She said that if I kick her out, she'll have to sleep in her car and it'll be my fault if something happens to her. I told her that's not my responsibility and that I've already let her stay way longer than we agreed, but she just stormed off to the guest room and slammed the door. Since that conversation, the atmosphere in my apartment has been incredibly tense. She barely speaks to me, and when she does, she's passive-aggressive. She started leaving bigger messes around the apartment like it's some kind of protest, and a couple times I've come home from work to find her and her friends hanging out in my living room like they own the place. When I asked her about having people over, without telling me, she said I was being controlling and that she's allowed to have a social life. My friend Cameron, who I've known since college, thinks I should just formally evict her if she won't leave on her own. But I looked into it, and apparently in Colorado, once someone has been living somewhere for more than a month, they're considered a tenant even without a lease. And I'd have to go through the whole legal eviction process, which could take months. I feel so stupid for letting this happen. I never should have agreed to let her stay in the first place. My sister Lauren says I'm too nice, and that Vanessa is clearly taking advantage of me, and that I need to be more assertive about getting her out. But every time I try to have a conversation about it, Vanessa turns it around on me and makes me feel like I'm the bad guy. She brings up how she helped me after my surgery all the time. Like that 1 week of help means I owe her indefinite free housing. The worst part is that I'm starting to think she never actually got evicted in the first place, or if she did it was because she was planning to manipulate her way into staying with me. My other friend Marcus pointed out that it's awfully convenient that she got evicted right during the time she was supposed to be staying with me temporarily, and that maybe she'd been planning this all along. The more I think about it, the more I wonder if she specifically offered to help me after surgery because she needed a place to stay and saw an opportunity. I've also noticed that some of my stuff has gone missing. Nothing major, but like I had this nice bottle of whiskey that a client gave me that's suddenly not in my cabinet anymore, and a couple of my dress shirts disappeared from my closet. When I asked Vanessa if she'd seen them, she acted like I was accusing her of something and got all offended. But I live alone otherwise, so there's no one else who could have taken them. Last night was what finally pushed me to write this post. I came home from work around 7, and Vanessa had ordered Chinese food delivery and had it spread out all over my kitchen table. I was hungry and asked if there was enough to share, and she said she'd only ordered enough for herself, but then I saw there were at least 4 different entrees and sides, which was clearly way more food than one person would order. I think she deliberately ordered extra just to be petty and not share with me in my own apartment. I went to my room and ordered my own food and just sat in there, eating alone while she was out in the living room watching TV with her feet up on my coffee table. I felt like a guest in my own home, and I was so angry I could barely eat. After I finished, I went out and tried one more time to have a calm conversation about her moving out, and she just looked at me and said she'll leave when she's ready, and I can't force her to go. She said if I try to kick her out, she'll tell everyone we know that I abandoned her when she needed help, and that she has texts and messages that make it look like I agreed to let her stay as long as she needed. I don't even know if that's true or if she's bluffing, but it scared me enough that I didn't push it further. I hate that I feel intimidated in my own apartment by someone who's supposed to be my friend. This morning, I woke up and she'd used the last of my coffee and hadn't bothered to tell me or offer to replace it, and when I texted her about it, she just replied with a shrugging emoji. I called my mom this afternoon to vent, and she was sympathetic, but also kind of gave me the I told you so speech about how I should have never let Vanessa stay in the first place. She said I need to give Vanessa a written 30-day notice to vacate and document everything in case I need to go through formal eviction, and that I should stop being so worried about hurting Vanessa's feelings when she clearly has no problem taking advantage of me. My mom is probably right, but I hate the idea of having to go through a legal process just to get my own apartment back. My coworker Patricia went through something similar last year with her cousin, and she said the eviction process was a nightmare and cost her over $2,000 in legal fees. I don't have that kind of money lying around, especially after missing work for surgery and having medical bills to pay. I feel like Vanessa has me completely trapped, and she knows it. I'm also worried about what she might do if I do start the eviction process. Like, will she trash my apartment, or steal my stuff, or make false accusations against me to make my life difficult? I know that sounds paranoid, but at this point I genuinely don't trust her anymore, and I don't know what she's capable of. The person living in my guest room is not the casual friend I thought I knew. She's turned into this manipulative stranger who's invaded my space and won't leave. I haven't been sleeping well because I'm constantly stressed about this situation, and it's affecting my work performance too. My boss Nathan asked me yesterday if everything was okay because I've seemed distracted lately, and I wanted to tell him what was going on, but I felt embarrassed that I'd let myself get into this position. I'm a 32-year-old professional, and I can't even handle a basic situation like getting an unwanted house guest to leave. It makes me feel pathetic. Derek, another guy I know from the gym, suggested I just change the locks while she's out one day and put her stuff on the curb, but I'm pretty sure that's illegal and could get me in even more trouble. As much as I fantasize about just making her disappear from my life, I know I have to do this the right way, or it could backfire on me badly. Tonight, Vanessa has some of her friends over again, and they're being loud in the living room while I'm hiding in my bedroom writing this. I can hear them laughing and playing music, and it's taking everything in me not to go out there and lose my temper. This is supposed to be my sanctuary, the place where I can relax after a long day of work, and instead it's been turned into Vanessa's crash pad, where she does whatever she wants with zero respect for me. I've started looking at my lease to see if there's anything about unauthorized occupants that might help me, but it's pretty vague, and I'm not sure it would hold up if Vanessa decided to fight it. My landlord is this older woman named Margaret, who's usually pretty hands-off, and I really don't want to have to involve her because I'm worried she might see this as me breaking the lease terms and use it as a reason to not renew when my lease is up in April. Tomorrow, I think I'm going to sit down and write out a formal 30-day notice like my mom suggested, and I'm going to give it to Vanessa in writing so there's a record of it. I'm terrified of how she's going to react, but I can't keep living like this. It's making me miserable and resentful, and I barely recognize myself anymore. I've become this anxious person who tiptoes around his own apartment and avoids going home sometimes, just so I don't have to deal with her. The thing that really gets me is that I was just trying to be a good friend and help someone out who claimed to need it, and somehow I've ended up being the villain in this story. Vanessa has been texting mutual friends, painting herself as this victim who's down on her luck and has nowhere to go, and me as this heartless person who's trying to make her homeless. I've seen some of the messages because our friend Holly showed me, And Vanessa is completely twisting the narrative to make herself look innocent. Part of me wants to defend myself and tell everyone the truth about how she's been taking advantage of me. But I also don't want to get into some big drama where we're both talking about each other to our friend group. I just want her out of my apartment and out of my life, and I want to go back to how things were before all of this started. I keep replaying that conversation where she first offered to help me after surgery and wondering if there were red flags I missed or if she was already planning to use my vulnerability as an opportunity to move in. I feel so naive and stupid for not seeing this coming and for being too nice to shut it down early on when I first started feeling uncomfortable. If anyone has been through something similar or has advice on how to handle this, I would really appreciate it, because right now I feel completely lost and don't know what my next move should be. I know I need to get her out, but I'm scared of the process and scared of what she might do. And I'm just so tired of feeling stressed and anxious all the time in my own home. I also need to know if I'm being unreasonable for wanting her out, because Vanessa has been so good at making me doubt myself and feel guilty. Like, am I supposed to just let her live here indefinitely because she helped me for 1 week 3 months ago? Is that really how friendship works? Or is she just manipulating me? I genuinely can't tell anymore because she's gotten so deep in my head. Anyway, I just needed to get all of this off my chest because I feel like I'm drowning in this situation and have nobody to really talk to about it who understands. Thanks for reading this novel. If you made it this far, any advice or even just validation that I'm not crazy would be really helpful right now. My coworker's dead husband's magic cards showed up at my house, and now his widow wants them back. So this is eating me alive, and I don't know what to do anymore. I need to get this off my chest because I can't talk to anyone in real life about it without them immediately taking sides. I'm a 28-year-old guy living in Phoenix, and I've been collecting Magic the Gathering cards since I was in middle school. It's been my main hobby for basically half my life at this point. I'm not rich by any means. I work as an IT support specialist at a mid-sized insurance company, but I've built up a pretty solid collection over the years. Nothing insane, but I've got some valuable cards, mostly from trading and buying collections from people who are getting out of the game. About 8 months ago, this new guy started in our department named Marcus. He was 34, seemed pretty cool, we got along well enough. We chat about normal stuff, sports, weekend plans, that kind of thing. One day, he saw my Magic playmat mousepad at my desk and his eyes lit up. Turns out he used to play back in high school and college, but hadn't touched the game in years. We started talking about it during lunch breaks, and he seemed genuinely interested in getting back into it. I told him about the local game store where I play Friday Night Magic and said he should come by sometime. Marcus seemed excited about the idea, but said he'd gotten rid of all his old cards years ago in a move, and would basically be starting from scratch. I offered to help him build a budget deck to start with, and he said he'd think about it. That was in February. Then in April, everything changed. Marcus didn't show up to work one Monday, and by Tuesday, we heard through the office grapevine that he'd been in a serious car accident over the weekend. He was in the hospital in critical condition. The whole office was shocked. We did a card and flower collection to send to him. By Thursday, we found out he didn't make it. He died Wednesday night. The guy had only been working with us for like 6 months, and suddenly he was just gone. It was surreal and honestly really sad, even though I didn't know him that well. The company sent flowers to the funeral and gave us the details if we wanted to attend. I didn't go because I genuinely barely knew the guy, and I figured it would be weird to show up when his actual friends and family were grieving. A bunch of people from the office did go though. Fast forward to late May, so about a month after Marcus died. I came home from work one day, and there was a large box sitting on my porch. It was addressed to me, but there was no return address. I brought it inside and opened it up, and I was completely floored. Inside were thousands of Magic cards. Like, I'm talking multiple long boxes filled with organized cards, binders with rare cards and sleeves, the whole 9 yards. At first I thought maybe a relative had sent me something, or there was some kind of mix-up with an online order I'd forgotten about. Then I found a note tucked into one of the binders. It was handwritten, and it said, "Hey man, you really got me excited about playing again. I've been going through my parents' storage unit and found my old collection from high school and college. I remembered you saying you collect, so I thought you might enjoy looking through these. Keep whatever you want, and if there's anything good, maybe we can use it to build me that budget deck you mentioned. Looking forward to playing some games soon, Marcus." I just sat there, staring at this note for a long time. The handwriting was kind of messy, but it was clearly written in a hurry. I checked the date on my security camera footage, and the box had been delivered by a standard delivery service while I was at work. I could see a woman who looked to be in her 60s or 70s had signed for it with the delivery guy. My first instinct was that I needed to contact Marcus's family and return these. But then I started thinking about the logistics. I didn't know his wife's name, I didn't have any contact information for his family, and honestly it felt incredibly awkward to reach out to a grieving widow I'd never met to say, "Hey, your dead husband sent me his magic card collection before he died." I also didn't know if Marcus had even told his wife he was sending me these cards. What if she had no idea and me showing up with them would just cause more pain? I decided to ask around the office carefully to see if anyone had Marcus's wife's contact information. I talked to Jennifer, who works in HR, and she obviously couldn't give me personal information, but I explained the situation vaguely, saying Marcus had lent me something before he passed, and I wanted to return it. She said she'd pass along my information to the family if they reached out, but that the company couldn't give out that kind of contact details for privacy reasons, even after an employee's death. So, I waited. Weeks went by, and nobody contacted me. In the meantime, I'd gone through the collection, and I'm not going to lie, it was incredible. Marcus had clearly been a serious player back in the day. There were cards in here from Alpha, Beta, Revised, all the early sets. Multiple dual lands in great condition. A Black Lotus that looked real, but I was scared to even get it appraised. Force of Wills, Mox Diamonds, stuff that I'd only ever dreamed of owning. If this collection was real, and in the condition it appeared to be, it was easily worth somewhere between $40,000 and $60,000. Maybe more. I kept telling myself I needed to find his family and return it, but as time went on, it got harder and harder to imagine actually doing that. Marcus had addressed the box to me. He'd written a note saying to keep what I wanted. Technically, legally speaking, he'd gifted these to me before he died. I started rationalizing that maybe he'd want me to have them since he knew I'd appreciate them and actually use them. Maybe his family didn't even know these existed, and returning them would just create confusion and conflict over his estate. I ended up keeping the cards. I integrated some of the more common stuff into my collection and put the really valuable pieces in a safety deposit box at my bank. I built 3 new decks with some of the cards, and I'm not going to lie, it felt amazing to finally play with cards I never thought I'd own. I told my playgroup I'd gotten lucky with some trades and investments, and they were just happy to see the new decks. Everything was fine until 2 weeks ago. I was at my desk at work, and I got a tap on my shoulder. I turned around, and there was a woman I'd never seen before standing there. She was probably in her early 30s, blonde hair, looked exhausted, and like she'd been crying recently. She introduced herself as Rachel and said she was Marcus's widow. My stomach immediately dropped. She said she'd been going through Marcus's things and found a receipt from a shipping company for a large package sent to my address in May. She'd been trying to figure out what it was because there was no description, just the weight and dimensions in my name. She'd asked around the office, and someone told her Marcus and I used to talk about magic cards. She asked me directly if Marcus had sent me his card collection. I completely froze. I didn't know what to say. I ended up telling her yes, that he'd sent me a box of cards with a note saying I could look through them and keep what I wanted. Her face just crumpled. She said she'd been looking for those cards for months. Apparently Marcus's parents had been storing them, and Marcus had picked them up a few days before the accident because he was planning to sell the collection to help with a down payment on a house they were trying to buy. She said the collection was supposed to be worth tens of thousands of dollars, and it was going to be a big part of their savings. I felt sick. I told her I had no idea, that the note made it sound like he was just sharing his old cards with a friend who played. She asked if she could have them back, and I just panicked and said I'd have to check what I still had because I'd already traded some away. That was a lie. I have everything except for a few bulk commons I'd use for casual decks. She gave me her number and asked me to please look and get back to her as soon as possible. I've been avoiding her calls for 2 weeks now. I looked up the legal situation, and from what I can tell, a gift given before someone dies is legally valid even if circumstances change. Marcus sent me the cards with a note saying to keep what I wanted. Technically, that's a gift. I never stole anything. But morally, I feel like absolute garbage. This woman lost her husband, and apparently they were in the process of trying to buy a house, and that card collection was supposed to help make that happen. Now she's struggling financially, and I'm sitting on $40,000 to $60,000 worth of cards that could change her life. But at the same time, I didn't do anything wrong. Marcus sent them to me. I didn't ask for them. I didn't manipulate him or trick him. He made the decision to send them, and he wrote a note saying I could keep them. If I give them back now, I'm out tens of thousands of dollars worth of cards that were legitimately gifted to me. Plus, I've already put some of the expensive ones in my decks and played with them at tournaments. The value might have even gone down slightly because they're no longer in perfect storage condition. My best friend Tyler thinks I should just give them back and take the loss because it's the right thing to do. He says that Marcus clearly intended to sell them and only sent them to me because he thought he'd be able to sort it out later and build a deck with whatever was valuable. He thinks the note was just Marcus being casual about something he thought would be a temporary loan or collaborative project. My other friend Eric thinks I'm legally in the clear and that Marcus's financial situation with his wife isn't my responsibility. He says if I give the cards back, I'm setting a precedent that gifts can be retroactively recalled if someone's circumstances change, and that's not how the law works. I've been losing sleep over this. Every time I look at those cards now, I feel a mixture of excitement about having them and crushing guilt about where they came from. Rachel has started emailing me at my work email asking for updates and saying she really needs the money from selling the collection. She's been polite, but I can tell she's getting desperate. Someone in the office mentioned she's been working 2 jobs since Marcus died to keep up with their mortgage. Part of me wants to just give everything back and wash my hands of this whole situation. But another part of me feels like I'm being manipulated by a sad situation into giving up something that was legitimately given to me. If Marcus wanted his wife to have these cards, he wouldn't have sent them to me with a note saying to keep what I wanted. Maybe he didn't tell her he was sending them because he knew she'd want to sell them and he wanted to get back into the hobby. Maybe this was his collection that he'd had since before they were married, and he felt like he had the right to do what he wanted with it. I don't know what to do. Legally, I think I'm in the right. Morally, I feel like a monster. The cards are incredible, and I genuinely love having them in my collection, but every time I play with them now, I think about Rachel working 2 jobs and trying to keep her house. At the same time, I keep coming back to the fact that I didn't do anything wrong and Marcus made a choice to send these to me. What would you do in this situation? Am I wrong for wanting to keep cards that were clearly gifted to me before someone died? Should I give them back even though I have no legal obligation to do so? I genuinely don't know anymore, and this whole thing is tearing me apart. Update. My coworker's dead husband's magic cards showed up at my house, and now his widow wants them back. I can't believe I'm back here writing this, but everything has completely exploded, and I need to get this out, because my life has turned into an absolute nightmare over the past 3 weeks. First off, I want to address some things people said in the comments on my original post, because a lot of you were right, and I was being a selfish idiot. I read every single comment, even the ones calling me a heartless asshole, and they really made me think hard about what kind of person I wanted to be. The comments about how Rachel was probably drowning financially and how Marcus clearly didn't intend this as a permanent gift really hit me hard. I decided I was going to give the cards back. I spent a weekend going through everything and cataloging it all to make sure I had the complete collection to return to Rachel. I was honestly feeling good about the decision, even though it hurt to let go of some of those cards. I drafted an email to Rachel saying I'd found everything and wanted to meet up to return it all to her. I was going to send it Monday morning. Then Sunday night, I got a call from my mom. She was frantic and said I needed to call her immediately. When I called back, she told me that a lawyer had contacted her looking for me. Apparently, Rachel had hired an attorney, and they were threatening to sue me for the full value of the collection plus emotional distress damages if I didn't return everything within 72 hours. My mom was freaking out, asking what I'd done and why a lawyer was calling her house. I'd never even told my parents about this whole situation because I knew they'd be disappointed in me. I immediately called the number the lawyer had left, got his voicemail because it was Sunday night. Monday morning I called again and got through to him. His name was Donald Kramer, and he was representing Rachel in an estate dispute. He said that the cards were marital property and that Marcus had no legal right to gift them without Rachel's consent, especially given that they were purchased during the marriage with joint funds. He said I had until Thursday to return the complete collection in the exact condition it was received, or they'd file a lawsuit not just for the value of the cards, but for conversion, which apparently is a legal term for basically stealing someone's property. I was panicking at this point. I told him I was planning to return the cards anyway and that this whole legal threat was unnecessary. He said that wasn't good enough and that I needed to provide a notarized inventory of everything in the collection with estimated values and proof that nothing had been sold or damaged. He also said Rachel was entitled to any increase in value of the cards from when they were sent to me until now, since the market had apparently gone up for some of the older cards. I tried explaining that Marcus had sent me the cards with a note saying to keep what I wanted and that I'd believed it was a legitimate gift. Donald cut me off and said that a person cannot gift away marital assets without spousal consent and that my belief about the gift was irrelevant. He said Marcus was clearly not in his right mind in the days before the accident, that he'd been acting erratically according to Rachel, and that the gift was invalid on multiple grounds. I hung up and immediately called Eric, who'd been telling me I was legally in the right. He referred me to his cousin, who's a lawyer in Scottsdale. I met with her Tuesday morning and explained everything. Her name is Patricia, and after hearing the whole story she told me, I was in a really complicated situation. She said that yes, normally a gift is a gift, but in this case, there were multiple factors working against me. The cards were likely marital property. Marcus had died before I could even acknowledge receiving them or thank him. And there was a good argument that his note was ambiguous about whether this was a permanent gift or a temporary loan for us to sort through together. Patricia said that if this went to court, I'd probably lose and end up paying not just the value of the cards, but also Rachel's legal fees and possibly my own, which could run into tens of thousands of dollars. She said my best bet was to return everything immediately and hope that Rachel dropped the legal threats. I asked what would happen if some of the cards had decreased in value or if I couldn't prove the exact condition of everything. She said that was a problem and that I should have taken detailed photos and videos when I first received the collection. I hadn't done that because I didn't think I'd ever need to prove anything. So, Wednesday, I boxed everything up. I'd kept most of it in really good condition, but I had played with some of the cards in tournaments, and a few of them had minor wear from shuffling, even though I'd used sleeves. I was terrified that Rachel would claim I damaged them. I took detailed photos and videos of everything as I packed it, and then I contacted Donald to arrange a return. He said Rachel wanted to meet in person with a third party present to verify the collection. We agreed to meet at a local game store that Friday afternoon. The owner, Greg, is someone I've known for years, and he agreed to act as a neutral party to verify the cards were authentic and account for the collection. Friday comes, and I show up at the store with 3 long boxes and 2 binders full of cards. Rachel is there with Donald the lawyer and also with Marcus's parents. I'd never met them before, and they looked at me like I was the scum of the earth. Marcus's dad, whose name I learned was Robert, didn't even let me start talking before he launched into this speech about how I'd taken advantage of his son's kindness and tried to steal from his widow. I tried to explain that I thought it was a gift, but Rachel started crying and said I'd been avoiding her for weeks and that she'd been about to lose her house because of me. That hit me like a truck, because in my mind, I'd only been avoiding her for 2 weeks, not months. But she was right that from her perspective, I'd been dodging her since she first contacted me, and that was entirely my fault. I apologized and said I was returning everything and that I never meant to cause her any pain. Donald told me to stop talking and just hand over the cards. Greg started going through everything, item by item, checking it against a list that Rachel had provided. Apparently, Marcus had kept a detailed spreadsheet of his collection from years ago, and she'd found it on an old laptop. This was good in that it meant we had a clear inventory to check against, but bad, because it meant there was proof of exactly what had been in the collection originally. We were going through everything, and it was matching up pretty well until we got to one of the binders. Greg pulled out a force of will and examined it under a magnifying glass and light. He looked at me and asked if I'd played with this card. I admitted I had, that I'd used it in a deck at a couple tournaments. He showed it to Donald and pointed out that there was minor whitening on the edges that wouldn't have been there if it had stayed in the binder. The card had gone from near mint condition to lightly played. Donald immediately jumped on this and said I'd damaged the property and decreased its value. He pulled out his phone and showed me current market prices for Force of Will in near mint versus lightly played condition. The difference was about $80. He said I owed Rachel compensation for the decreased value. I said that was ridiculous, that $80 was nothing compared to what I was returning, and that normal wear from careful play wasn't damage. Robert Marcus's dad got in my face and started yelling that I'd stolen from his dead son and that I should be arrested. The whole thing devolved into chaos. Rachel was sobbing, Robert was yelling, Donald was threatening me with additional legal action, and I was just standing there feeling like the worst person alive. Greg eventually got everyone to calm down and said that in his professional opinion, the wear on the card was minimal and consistent with careful play with sleeves, and that the value difference was negligible in the context of a collection worth tens of thousands. We finished going through everything and confirmed that the complete collection was there, except for maybe 50 or 60 bulk common cards that I'd used for casual decks, and honestly couldn't even remember which. Specific ones they were. Donald said that was unacceptable and that I needed to provide compensation for the missing cards. I said I'd give Rachel $20 for bulk commons, and he said the principle mattered more than the amount. We eventually agreed that I'd pay $50 to cover any missing bulk cards, and the whole thing would be settled. I thought that was the end of it. I signed a document that Donald had prepared saying I was returning the collection in full, that I acknowledged it was never mine to keep, and that I wouldn't make any future claims on it. Rachel wouldn't even look at me. Marcus's mom, whose name was Diane, said quietly that she hoped I'd think about what kind of person I wanted to be. That one hurt more than all the yelling. I left the game store feeling horrible, but also relieved that it was over. I'd lost an incredible collection, but at least the legal nightmare was done, and Rachel had her cards back. I could move on with my life. Then, Monday at work, everything got worse. I got called into a meeting with Jennifer from HR and my manager Paul. They sat me down and said they'd received a complaint about my conduct regarding another employee's widow. My stomach dropped. Apparently, Rachel had contacted the company and said I'd been harassing her and had stolen property from her deceased husband. She wanted the company to take action against me. I tried to explain the whole situation, but Jennifer cut me off and said that regardless of the details, I'd created a hostile situation involving an employee's surviving family member, and that reflected poorly on the company. Paul said that several people in the office had heard about the situation, and it was creating an uncomfortable work environment. They were putting me on a formal written warning for conduct unbecoming of company standards. I was furious. I told them I'd returned everything, that there was no harassment, and that Rachel was the one who'd hired a lawyer to threaten me. Jennifer said that the company had to take complaints from surviving family members seriously, and that my behavior of avoiding Rachel's initial contact for weeks was unprofessional. The warning would stay in my file for a year, and any additional complaints would result in termination. I left that meeting feeling completely defeated. Not only had I lost the cards, but now my job was in jeopardy over this whole mess. I'd gone from having an incredible collection to being threatened with lawsuits and having a warning in my employment file. But it gets even worse. That Wednesday, I was at my regular Friday Night Magic, except it was on Wednesday because the store was doing a special event. I'd been going to this store for 6 years and knew everyone there, except this week when I walked in, the vibe was completely off. People were avoiding eye contact with me. My usual playgroup Eric and 2 other guys named Scott and Brandon didn't save me a seat at their table like they normally did. I found out later that Greg, the store owner, had told people about what happened with Rachel and the collection. He hadn't meant it maliciously. He'd just been talking about this crazy situation he'd been pulled into. But word spreads fast in the magic community. By the time I showed up, everyone knew I'd kept a dead guy's valuable collection and had to be legally threatened into returning it. I tried to play in the tournament, but my first round opponent, a guy named Keith, who I'd played with dozens of times, just coldly shuffled up and didn't say a word to me the whole match. When I won, he just signed the match slip and walked away. Second round, I got paired against a newer player who didn't know me, and that went fine. Third round, I was paired against Scott from my usual playgroup, and before we even started, he said he didn't want to play against me and called the judge to drop from the tournament. After the event, I tried to talk to Eric and asked what was going on. He said that people felt I'd crossed a line and that the magic community takes theft seriously. I tried to explain that it wasn't theft, that Marcus had sent me the cards, but Eric said it didn't matter because I'd kept them even after the widow came looking for them. He said a lot of people felt I'd given the community a bad reputation and that I should probably find a different store to play at for a while. I was devastated. This store and this community had been a huge part of my life for years, and now I was being ostracized over this situation. I haven't been back since. I looked into other stores in the Phoenix area, but the magic community is pretty interconnected, and I'm terrified the story has spread to other shops too. My friendship with Tyler has gotten weird too. He's still talking to me, but I can tell he's disappointed. He keeps making comments about doing the right thing and how character is defined by choices we make when nobody's looking. I want to scream at him that I did return everything, but in his mind, I only did it after being threatened with legal action, so it doesn't count. The worst part is, I keep thinking about those cards. I had them in my hands for months. I played games with a Black Lotus. I built decks with dual lands and Power 9 cards. I had a collection that most players only dream about, and I lost it all. And for what? I followed the law as I understood it and tried to keep something that was given to me, and now I'm the villain in everyone's story. Rachel sold the collection last week. I know because Greg posted about it on social media. He'd helped her find a buyer and facilitated the sale. She got $52,000 for everything. That money apparently saved her house and gave her enough cushion to quit one of her jobs. Everyone is commenting about what a heartwarming ending it is and how the magic community came together to help a widow in need. Nobody mentions that I'm the one who returned the collection or that I'd been planning to return it before the lawyers got involved. I've been thinking about quitting magic entirely. Every time I look at my own collection now, I just think about the cards I had and lost. My decks feel boring and inadequate. I can't enjoy playing anymore because I keep remembering what it felt like to play with those incredible cards. It's like I got a taste of something amazing and now everything else is ruined by comparison. My mom called me last week and said she'd been thinking about the situation. She said she understood why I'd wanted to keep the cards, but that she was glad I'd returned them because it was the right thing to do. She said sometimes doing the right thing costs us something, and that's what makes it meaningful. I told her I only returned them because I was threatened with a lawsuit, and she said that didn't matter. The outcome was what counted. I don't know if I agree with that, but I didn't have the energy to argue. I've been applying to jobs at other companies because the situation at work is unbearable. Every time I see Jennifer in the hallway, I feel humiliated. My manager, Paul, has been cold to me since the HR meeting. A couple coworkers have asked me about what happened with Marcus's cards, and I just say it was a misunderstanding that got resolved. I don't have the energy to explain the whole thing anymore. I'm also out about $4,000 between the lawyer consultation with Patricia, the $50 I gave Rachel for bulk commons, and the value of some of my own cards I sold to cover the legal consultation. So not only did I lose the collection, but this whole nightmare actually cost me money. The thing that keeps me up at night is wondering if Marcus would have wanted this outcome. He sent me those cards. He wrote a note saying to keep what I wanted. If he'd survived the accident, would he have asked for them back? Would he have been mad that I kept them? Or would he have been happy that another player was enjoying cards that had been sitting in storage for years? I'll never know, and that haunts me. Part of me is still angry at Rachel for hiring a lawyer and threatening me instead of just talking to me like a human being. If she'd explained the situation calmly from the beginning, maybe I would have returned everything without all the drama. But another part of me knows I was avoiding her calls and emails, and that I'd probably have kept making excuses if she hadn't forced the issue legally. I don't know which version of myself to believe. Tyler said something to me last night that I can't stop thinking about. He said that Marcus probably sent me those cards in a moment of enthusiasm about getting back into Magic, and that if he'd lived, he would have realized he needed to sell them for the house and would have awkwardly asked for them back. Tyler said by keeping them, I'd taken away Rachel's ability to have that conversation with her husband and figure out together what to do with them. That Marcus's death didn't change the fact that those cards were part of their shared life and their shared plans. When he said it like that, I felt sick all over again. I don't know what I'm looking for by posting this update. I guess I just needed to tell someone how everything fell apart. I lost the cards, I'm losing my friend group, my job is unstable, and my reputation in the local Magic community is destroyed. All over a decision to keep something that I thought was legitimately mine. I did eventually do what everyone said was the right thing, but apparently doing it only after being threatened doesn't count, and now I'm paying the price socially and professionally. If anyone else ever finds themselves in a situation like this, please learn from my mistakes. Don't rationalize keeping something when you know deep down the situation is more complicated than you want it to be. Don't avoid uncomfortable conversations because they'll only get worse with time. And don't assume that being legally right means you're morally right, because sometimes those are two very different things. I wish someone had told me all this 8 months ago before I opened that box on my porch. Stories number 5. My husband found out I've been visiting someone from my past, and now he thinks I've been lying to him for our entire relationship. I honestly don't even know where to begin with this, because my entire marriage feels like it's falling apart over something that I never thought would be an issue, and I'm sitting here at almost midnight writing this because my husband won't talk to me, and I don't know what else to do. We've been together for 6 years, married for 3, and up until 2 weeks ago, I thought we had a really solid relationship, but now he's looking at me like I'm a stranger, and I feel like I'm losing my mind trying to explain something that shouldn't even need explaining. I'm 27 and my husband Trevor is 28, and we live in Portland, Oregon, where we both grew up. Not in the same neighborhoods, but close enough that we have some overlapping social circles from high school, though we didn't actually meet until college. Trevor works as a project manager for a construction company, and I'm a nurse at one of the hospitals downtown. I work mostly evening shifts, which is relevant to all of this. We have a good life. We bought a small house in Southeast Portland about 2 years ago. We have a dog named Biscuit. We go hiking on weekends. We have friends we see regularly. Everything seemed normal and happy. The issue started 2 Thursdays ago when Trevor came home early from work because a site inspection got canceled, and he wasn't expecting to be back until after 6, but he walked in around 3 in the afternoon. I wasn't home because Thursday is one of my days off, and I told him I was going to run errands and maybe meet up with my friend Shauna for coffee. That's what I always tell him I'm doing on Thursday afternoons, and it's not technically a lie, but it's not the complete truth either, and that's where everything went wrong. Trevor called me when he got home asking where I was, and I told him I was just finishing up some shopping and would be back soon. He asked if I could pick up dinner on the way home, and I said sure. I got back around 4:30 with Thai food from the place near our house, and when I walked in, Trevor was sitting on the couch with his arms crossed, and he had this look on his face that I'd never seen before, like he was angry and hurt at the same time. He asked me where I'd really been, and I told him the truth, that I'd been running errands and had stopped for coffee. He said he'd called Shauna to see if she wanted to come over for dinner since I'd supposedly been with her. And Shauna had no idea what he was talking about. Said she hadn't seen me in 2 weeks. My stomach just dropped because I realized I'd been caught in a lie, but it wasn't the kind of lie he was thinking it was. Trevor asked me again where I'd been, and I didn't know how to answer because the real answer is complicated and involves a part of my past that I've never fully explained to him. I hesitated too long, and he stood up and asked if I was having an affair. I immediately said no, absolutely not, nothing like that at all. He said then, where have I been going every Thursday for the past year and a half? Because he'd asked Shauna, and apparently I'd been using her as an alibi for months, and she'd covered for me a few times early on, but then stopped because she didn't want to be involved in whatever I was doing. I didn't even know Shauna had covered for me. She'd never mentioned it, and now I felt terrible that I'd put her in that position without realizing it. Trevor was staring at me, waiting for an answer, and I finally told him that I'd been visiting someone at a care facility in Beverton. He asked who, and I said it was complicated. That was the wrong thing to say, because he completely lost it and started saying that if I wasn't cheating then, why couldn't I just tell him who I was visiting and why I'd been lying about it for over a year? I tried to explain, but I was flustered and emotional, and it came out all wrong. I told him I'd been visiting a man named Andrew, who I knew before Trevor and I got together. Trevor's face went white, and he asked if Andrew was an ex-boyfriend. I said not exactly, but we were close at one point. He asked what not exactly meant, and why this person was in a care facility, and why I'd been secretly visiting him for a year and a half. I tried to start from the beginning, but Trevor cut me off and said he needed to know right then if I'd been having an emotional affair with someone I used to be involved with. That's when I broke down crying, because it's not like that at all, and the fact that Trevor would think I was capable of that hurt so much. I told him Andrew has severe brain damage from an accident, and he's been in a vegetative state for almost 8 years, and I visit him on Thursdays because his family can't afford to visit as often as they'd like, and I'd promised his sister I'd check in on him regularly. Trevor just stared at me like I'd grown a second head and asked why I'd never mentioned this person in all the years we'd been together. I said it never came up, and it's a painful part of my past that I don't like talking about. He said that's not an answer, and that keeping something this significant hidden feels like lying. I tried to explain the whole history, but I was crying, and he was angry, and it was just a mess. The basic story is that I met Andrew when I was 19, and he was 21. This was before I met Trevor. I was in my second year of nursing school, and Andrew was a friend of a friend who I met at a party. We hit it off immediately and started hanging out all the time. We never officially dated, but there was definitely something between us. Like we both knew we had feelings for each other, but the timing was never quite right. He was dealing with some family stuff, and I was focused on school, and we just stayed in this weird space of being more than friends, but not quite together. This went on for about 8 months, and we were getting closer, and I really thought we might eventually become a real couple. Then one night in February, this was 2018, so almost 8 years ago now, Andrew was driving home from visiting his parents in Salem, and he hit a patch of black ice on I-5. His car spun out and hit a barrier and then got hit by a semi-truck. He was in a coma for 3 weeks, and when he finally stabilized, the doctors said he had severe traumatic brain injury and might never wake up. His family was devastated. I was devastated. Everyone who knew him was just in shock. I visited him in the hospital every day for the first month. His parents were there constantly, and his younger sister Meredith, who was only 16 at the time, basically lived at the hospital. After a few months, Andrew was transferred to a long-term care facility because the hospital couldn't keep him indefinitely, and the doctors said his chances of recovering consciousness were minimal. His family kept up regular visits, but it was hard. They lived an hour away, and both his parents worked, and Meredith was still in high school. I was still visiting when I could, but I was also trying to move forward with my life because what else could I do? I couldn't spend forever mourning someone who wasn't even technically my boyfriend. I gradually visited less frequently, maybe once a month, then once every few months. I met Trevor about a year after Andrew's accident, and we started dating, and my life moved forward. I'd think about Andrew sometimes, but it felt like a closed chapter of my life. This tragic thing that happened to someone I cared about, but who was no longer really part of my present life. I never mentioned him to Trevor, because how do you bring that up? Like, oh, by the way, I used to have this almost relationship with a guy who's now been in a vegetative state for however many years. It felt like something too heavy and complicated to put on a new relationship. Fast forward to about a year and a half ago, so this would be summer of 2024. I ran into Meredith at a grocery store. She's 24 now and working as a teacher. We recognized each other immediately and ended up talking in the parking lot for like an hour catching up. She told me Andrew was still at the same facility and still unresponsive. She said their parents had mostly stopped visiting because it was too painful, and she tried to go every week, but sometimes her schedule didn't allow it. She started crying and said she felt guilty that Andrew was basically alone most of the time with just the facility staff and no familiar faces around him. I felt terrible hearing this, and without really thinking about it, I offered to start visiting again. Meredith was so grateful, and we exchanged numbers, and I told her I'd try to go on Thursdays, since that's one of my regular days off. I started going every Thursday afternoon. I'd spend about an hour or two at the facility, just sitting with Andrew, sometimes reading to him or playing music, even though he shows no signs of awareness. The staff says some families believe it helps to have people talk to their loved ones even in vegetative states, so I do it. I never mentioned this to Trevor, because honestly, it just didn't seem relevant to our daily life. It's something I do on my day off. It takes a few hours, and it's helping Meredith feel less guilty about not being able to visit as often as she'd like. I'd tell Trevor I was running errands or meeting Shauna, because that was easier than explaining the whole complicated history with Andrew. I didn't think of it as lying, more like just not bringing up something depressing and complex that didn't affect our relationship. But now, Trevor sees it completely differently, and I don't know how to bridge that gap. After I explained everything that Thursday night, he was quiet for a long time, and then he asked why I'd never told him about Andrew at all. Not just the visits, but the whole history. I said it never seemed important enough to bring up. He said a person I was in love with, who's been in a coma for 8 years, seemed pretty important. I said I never said I was in love with Andrew, just that we were close. Trevor said I've been visiting this guy every single week for over a year. That's more consistent than I visit my own grandmother. Clearly, he means something significant to me. I didn't know how to argue with that, because he's not wrong that it's significant, but not in the way Trevor thinks. Trevor asked if I still have feelings for Andrew, and I said no. How could I? He's been unresponsive for 8 years. The person I knew doesn't exist anymore. Trevor said then, why do I visit so religiously every Thursday? Without fail. I said because I promised Meredith, and because I feel like I owe it to who Andrew used to be. Trevor said that doesn't make sense, and that I'm choosing to spend my free time with someone from my past, instead of being honest with my husband about where I am and what I'm doing. He said he felt betrayed, not just by the lying about where I was, but by the fact that I'd kept this entire person and this entire history hidden from him for our whole relationship. He said, how is he supposed to trust me now when he's realizing I'm capable of maintaining a significant secret for years? I tried to explain that it wasn't meant to be a secret, it just never came up, and then once time had passed, it felt weird to bring it up. He said that's exactly what makes it a secret, the fact that I deliberately chose not to mention it. We fought for hours that night, and finally, Trevor said he needed space to think, and he went to stay at his friend Connor's apartment. He's been there for almost 2 weeks now. He comes home occasionally to get clothes or check on things, but he won't have a real conversation with me. I've tried texting and calling to explain better, but he just responds with short messages saying he needs time. I've tried to get our friends involved to mediate, but Trevor told Connor not to let me use him as a messenger, and our mutual friends are staying out of it, saying it's between us. I talked to Shauna and apologized for apparently involving her without realizing it, and she said she'd covered for me early on because I'd asked her to if Trevor ever called, which I honestly don't remember doing, but I must have. She said she'd stopped doing it because she didn't like lying to Trevor, and she'd assumed I'd stopped visiting or had told him the truth. She said she understands why I didn't tell Trevor about Andrew, but that she can also see why he's hurt. She said the lying about where I was going every week is harder to justify than just not mentioning someone from my past. My coworker Denise, who I'm pretty close with, says I messed up big time, and that this kind of secret is exactly the type of thing that destroys marriages. She said even if nothing inappropriate was happening, the secrecy itself creates the same breach of trust as an actual affair. I tried to argue that it's not the same at all, but she said from Trevor's perspective, I've been sneaking around for over a year to visit another man and lying about it. How is he supposed to see that as anything but suspicious? I called my mom to get her perspective, and she said she understands both sides, but that I should have been honest with Trevor from the start. She said when you're married, you don't get to have secret parts of your life, even if they seem harmless to you. She said Trevor's hurt comes from feeling like he doesn't really know me, like I've been hiding a significant part of who I am and what I care about. I said I wasn't hiding who I am, I just didn't mention one thing I do on my day off. She said it's not one thing though, it's a whole history with another man and an ongoing commitment that I deliberately concealed. I've thought a lot about going to see Andrew this past Thursday because that's my routine, but it felt wrong to go while Trevor and I are in this state. I texted Meredith to explain that I was dealing with some personal stuff and might miss a few visits. She called me immediately, and I ended up telling her the whole situation. She felt terrible and said she'd had no idea I wasn't telling my husband about the visits. She'd assumed Trevor knew and was supportive. She said if she'd known it was causing problems in my marriage, she never would have asked me to visit. I told her it wasn't her fault and that I should have been upfront with Trevor from the beginning. Meredith said she'd be happy to talk to Trevor if that would help, to explain that the visits are purely out of kindness and that there's nothing inappropriate about them. I said I didn't think that would help because the issue isn't whether Trevor believes something inappropriate is happening, it's that he feels betrayed by the secrecy. Meredith said she understood and that she hoped we could work it out, but that I shouldn't feel obligated to keep visiting if it's destroying my marriage. That conversation made me feel even worse, because now I'm wondering if I should just stop visiting Andrew altogether to prove to Trevor that our marriage is more important. But then I feel guilty because I made a commitment to Meredith and to Andrew in whatever capacity he can still be aware of things. I'm also angry at myself for letting this happen. I should have just told Trevor about Andrew years ago, or at least when I started visiting again. But I kept putting it off because I knew it would be an awkward conversation, and now it's become this huge betrayal in his eyes. Last Friday, Trevor finally agreed to meet me for coffee to talk. I thought maybe we could actually communicate and work through this, but it didn't go well. He started by asking me to be completely honest about my feelings for Andrew. I said I care about him as someone who was important to me at one point in my life, but that I'm not in love with him and haven't been for years. Trevor asked if I'd been in love with him back when we were close, and I admitted that I probably had been or was heading in that direction before the accident. Trevor's whole face changed, and he said so I've been visiting someone I was in love with every week for over a year and lying to him about it. I said it's not like that, because Andrew isn't capable of having a relationship with anyone. He's not even conscious. Trevor said that doesn't matter. The fact is I've been maintaining a connection to someone from my romantic past and hiding it. I said it's not a romantic connection, it's more like visiting someone in a hospital, which is basically what it is. Trevor said if it was just visiting someone in a hospital like a charitable thing, then why did I lie about it? Why not just tell him that's what I was doing? I didn't have a good answer for that. The truth is, I knew Trevor wouldn't understand or would ask a lot of questions I didn't want to answer, and it was easier to just not mention it. But saying that out loud made me sound guilty, even though I don't think I did anything wrong. Trevor said the fact that I knew he'd have a problem with it and chose to hide it rather than discuss it with him is exactly the problem. He said I made a unilateral decision about something that affects both of us because now he's the husband whose wife has been secretly visiting another man, and he looks like an idiot who didn't know what was going on in his own marriage. I hadn't thought about it from that angle, about how it looks to other people. Trevor said Connor's girlfriend Emily made a comment about how she'd seen me at the Beaverton Mall on a Thursday a few months ago and had said hi, but I seemed distracted and rushed off. Trevor had said I must have been running errands like I always do on Thursdays, and Emily had said yeah, probably, although I'd seemed kind of secretive. At the time, Trevor had brushed it off, but now he's replaying every moment like that and seeing it through a different lens. He said he talked to some of his friends about the situation without naming me specifically, and the consensus was that this level of secret keeping is a major red flag. He said his friend Nathan, who's a divorce attorney, said that in his experience when someone is hiding regular meetings with a person of romantic interest, it's usually because the relationship is at minimum emotionally inappropriate. I said, Nathan doesn't know the full situation, and it's not fair to apply general rules to something this specific. Trevor said, the specific situation is that I chose to lie for over a year, and that's not okay, regardless of the context. We went in circles for 2 hours at that coffee shop and got nowhere. I was crying by the end, and Trevor looked exhausted. He said he didn't know if he could get past this, and that he needed more time. I asked how much time, and he said he didn't know. I asked if we could do counseling, and he said maybe eventually, but right now he's too angry to sit in a room with me and a therapist. I asked if he still loved me, and he said yes, but he didn't know if love was enough when trust is broken. That was a week ago, and things have only gotten worse. Trevor told his parents about what's going on. I don't know what exactly he said, but his mom called me, and she was cold in a way she's never been before. She said she was disappointed in me, and that she'd always thought I was trustworthy. I tried to explain, but she cut me off and said that keeping secrets from your spouse is never okay, and that Trevor deserves better. That hurt more than almost anything else, because Trevor's parents have always treated me like a daughter, and now I've lost their respect. My own parents are worried about me. My dad drove down from Seattle last weekend to check on me and spent the whole visit trying to get me to see Trevor's side, while also making sure I was eating and sleeping okay. He said the problem isn't just what I did, but how I'm framing it to Trevor. He said I keep saying it wasn't a secret, it just never came up, but that sounds like I'm not taking responsibility. He said I need to own that I actively concealed something significant and apologize for that specifically rather than trying to minimize it. I've been thinking a lot about what my dad said, and I realize he's right that I've been defensive because I don't think I did anything morally wrong. Yes, I lied about where I was going on Thursdays, but I was doing something kind and compassionate, visiting someone who's alone and helping his family. The lying was wrong, but the action itself was good, and I keep getting tangled up trying to explain that to Trevor. But Trevor doesn't care about whether visiting Andrew was good or bad. He cares that I wasn't honest with him and that I maintained a connection to someone from my romantic past without his knowledge. I tried to write Trevor a letter explaining everything more clearly and apologizing without being defensive. I gave it to him on Tuesday when he stopped by to get some more clothes. He took it, but I don't know if he's read it. I wrote about how I met Andrew, what our relationship was, how the accident affected me, why I started visiting again, and why I didn't tell Trevor about it. I took full responsibility for the lying and said I understood why he felt betrayed. I said I wanted to work on our marriage and would do whatever it took to rebuild trust, including stopping the visits if that's what he needed. Writing that last part hurt because I don't want to abandon Andrew and Meredith, but I also don't want to lose my marriage. I've been thinking about what's more important, and obviously Trevor is more important. He's my husband and my partner and the person I want to spend my life with. Andrew is someone from my past who I care about, but who isn't really present in any meaningful way. If I have to choose, I choose Trevor, but I also resent having to make that choice because I don't think the two things should be in conflict. My sister Amanda, who lives in Eugene, called me yesterday and said she talked to Trevor. I didn't even know they had each other's numbers, but apparently they've stayed in touch more than I realized. She said Trevor is really hurt and feels like he doesn't know me anymore. She said he's questioning everything about our relationship now, wondering what else I might be hiding or what other parts of my life he doesn't know about. I said there's nothing else. This is the only thing I didn't tell him. Amanda said that doesn't matter because now he can't be sure of that. She said I need to give him space and time and stop trying to force conversations before he's ready. She said the more I push to resolve this quickly, the more it looks like I'm trying to make it go away rather than letting him process his feelings. I said I just want to fix things, and she said I can't fix this on my timeline. Trevor gets to decide when and if he's ready to work on the marriage. That terrifies me, because what if he decides he's not ready? What if he wants a divorce? I can't sleep, I've barely been eating, I'm a mess at work, and I know my patients and coworkers can tell something is wrong. I had a panic attack in the medication room on Wednesday, and one of the other nurses, Teresa, found me and helped me calm down. I ended up telling her everything, and she was sympathetic, but also said I'd put myself in an impossible situation. She said there was no version of this story where Trevor wasn't going to feel betrayed once he found out. The only question was whether I told him voluntarily or he discovered it himself, and I'd chosen the worst option by letting him discover it. I've been going over and over that Thursday afternoon, trying to figure out how I could have handled it differently. If I just told Trevor the truth when he called asking where I was, if I just said I'm visiting someone at a care facility and we'll talk about it when I get home, would that have been better? Probably yes. Or if I told him about Andrew years ago, just mentioned casually at some point that I used to know this guy who was in a terrible accident, would that have made the visits less shocking? Definitely yes, but I can't go back and change any of that now. I'm also angry at Trevor in a way that I know isn't fair, but I can't help feeling. I'm angry that he's not giving me credit for doing something kind and compassionate. I'm angry that he's making this about him and his feelings when Andrew is the one lying in a care facility with no awareness and Meredith is the one dealing with the grief of having a brother who's alive but gone. I'm angry that Trevor won't even try to understand my perspective or why I made the choices I made. But then I feel guilty for being angry because I know I'm the one who messed up. Last Thursday, I ended up going to visit Andrew because I couldn't stand the thought of breaking that commitment on top of everything else. I told myself it didn't matter if Trevor found out because things couldn't get worse than they already are. I sat with Andrew for an hour, reading from a book Meredith had brought about hiking trails in Oregon, something Andrew used to be passionate about. The whole time, I was thinking about how strange my life has become, that I'm sitting with someone who doesn't know I'm there while my marriage falls apart, because I wouldn't stop coming here. When I got home, Trevor was there, which surprised me because he hasn't been staying at the house. He asked where I'd been, and I told him the truth, that I'd gone to visit Andrew. His face just fell, and he said so even in the middle of our marriage crisis, I'm prioritizing visits to another man over working on our relationship. I said it's not prioritizing, I just didn't want to abandon a commitment I'd made. He said the commitment to our marriage should come first, and I said I agree, but I don't think the two things are mutually exclusive. Trevor said everything about this situation shows that I don't understand what marriage means. He said marriage means you don't have secret parts of your life, you don't maintain connections with romantic interests without your partner's knowledge, and you don't continue doing something that's causing harm to the relationship just because you don't think you should have to stop. I said Andrew isn't a romantic interest. He's a person in a tragic situation who I'm trying to help. Trevor said if that's all it was, I would have told him about it from the start. We fought again, and Trevor left, and I haven't heard from him since. That was yesterday. I'm terrified that this is it, that our marriage is actually over because of this. I've thought about reaching out to Connor to see if he knows how Trevor is doing, but I don't want to put him in an awkward position. I've thought about showing up at Connor's apartment to talk to Trevor in person, but I'm worried that would be crossing a boundary and making things worse. I talked to a therapist on my own. I found someone who had an opening, and I went in on Friday afternoon. I told her everything, and she said that what I'm experiencing is a conflict between two valid but competing values. The value of honoring commitments and showing compassion versus the value of transparency and honesty in marriage. She said neither one is wrong, but in a marriage, The transparency has to come first because without that foundation, nothing else works. She said, I can't expect Trevor to understand or accept the visits if he wasn't given the choice to agree or disagree with them in the first place. That made sense to me in the moment, but now I'm thinking about it more, and I'm not sure I agree. Why does Trevor get veto power over me visiting someone in a care facility? I'm not doing anything wrong. I'm not having an affair. I'm not neglecting my responsibilities or our relationship. I go on my day off for a couple hours, and then I come home and live my normal life. Why should that require his permission or approval? But then I remember that it's not about permission. It's about honesty. And that I do owe Trevor honesty, even if I don't owe him control over my choices. I'm so confused and exhausted, and I don't know what to do next. Do I stop visiting Andrew to show Trevor he's my priority? Do I keep visiting and accept that my marriage might end? Do I try to find some middle ground where I visit less frequently, or where Trevor comes with me? Would Trevor even want to meet Andrew and see the situation for himself, or would that make it worse? I have no idea what he's thinking or feeling because he won't talk to me. Our 3-year wedding anniversary is coming up in 10 days, and I can't stop thinking about that. We were supposed to go to the coast for a long weekend. We'd booked a cabin months ago, and I'd requested the time off work. Obviously, that's not happening now. I thought about canceling the reservation, but I don't want to be the one to officially call off our anniversary trip. It feels too final. But I also can't imagine Trevor wanting to go away together when he can barely stand to be in the same room as me. I keep replaying the early days of our relationship, trying to figure out when I should have told Trevor about Andrew. On our third date, when we were talking about past relationships, that feels too heavy for a third date. 6 months in, when things were getting serious, maybe, but at that point, Andrew felt so far in the past that bringing him up seemed weird. When Trevor proposed, before the wedding, at what point does not mentioning someone become actively hiding them, and how was I supposed to know where that line was? I'm also thinking about what happens if we do get divorced over this. How do I explain that to people? How do I tell future partners about why my marriage ended? Do I stop visiting Andrew at that point, since the whole reason I'm losing my marriage is because of those visits? Would stopping then make losing Trevor meaningless? Or would it just prove that I should have stopped earlier? These questions are eating away at me, and I don't have answers to any of them. My friend from nursing school, Jasmine, came over on Saturday night with wine and takeout and let me cry for 3 hours. She said she doesn't know how to help me fix this, but that she's here for whatever I need. She said maybe Trevor needs to hit rock bottom with his anger and hurt before he can start to come back, and that I need to be patient. I said I don't know how to be patient when my marriage is disintegrating. She said I don't have a choice, that pushing harder will only make Trevor pull away more. I've been looking at old photos of Trevor and me on my phone, from our wedding and our honeymoon and various trips and normal days. We look so happy and so sure of each other. I don't know how we got from there to here so quickly. 2 weeks ago, everything was fine, and now I don't know if my husband still wants to be married to me. And the worst part is, I still don't fully understand what I did that was so terrible. I understand the lying was wrong, but the magnitude of Trevor's reaction feels disproportionate to me, and I don't know if that means I'm still not getting it or if he's overreacting. My mom suggested I write down everything I want to say to Trevor and then sit on it for a few days before deciding whether to send it. She said I'm too emotional right now to communicate clearly and that I need to really think about what I want the outcome to be. Do I want to be right or do I want to be married? Because I probably can't have both. That hit me hard because she's right that I've been so focused on explaining my side and making Trevor understand that I haven't focused enough on just apologizing and accepting responsibility. So I've been working on a longer letter, really trying to put myself in Trevor's shoes and imagine how this whole situation looks from his perspective. A wife who disappears every Thursday and lies about where she's going. A wife who has a whole history with another man that she never mentioned. A wife who, when confronted, doubles down and keeps doing the thing that's causing pain. When I look at it that way, I can see why Trevor is so hurt and why he's questioning everything. I wouldn't trust me either if I were him. But I also keep coming back to the fact that my intentions were good, and that should count for something. I wasn't sneaking around to do something selfish or harmful. I was sneaking around to do something compassionate that I knew would be hard to explain. That doesn't make the lying okay, but it should make Trevor at least willing to hear me out and try to understand rather than just shutting down completely. Or maybe I'm still making excuses and not taking full responsibility like everyone keeps telling me. I don't know what I'm hoping to get from posting all of this here. Maybe I just needed to write it all out to process it. Maybe I'm hoping someone will tell me how to fix this, or tell me that Trevor is being unreasonable. Maybe I'm hoping someone will tell me I'm completely wrong and help me see what I'm missing. I genuinely don't know anymore what's right or wrong in this situation. I just know that I'm losing the person I love most in the world, and I don't know how to stop it from happening. If anyone has been through something similar, or has advice on how to talk to Trevor in a way that might actually get through to him, I'm desperate to hear it. I feel like I'm drowning, and I don't know how to save my marriage, or even if it can be saved at this point. I just want my husband back, and I want things to go back to normal, but I don't think that's possible anymore, and I don't know how to accept that. Update. My husband found out I've been visiting someone from my past, and now he thinks I've been lying to him for our entire relationship. It's been almost 3 months since I posted originally, and I honestly never thought I'd be back here writing an update, but so much has happened that I need to get it all out, because I have nobody left to talk to about any of this, and I feel like I'm going insane. Things got so much worse before they got even slightly better, and I'm still not sure if my marriage is going to survive, but at least Trevor is talking to me now, which is more than I could say a month ago. I'll start from where I left off, which was Trevor staying at Connor's place and barely speaking to me except to tell me he needed more time. Our anniversary came and went without acknowledgement from either of us. I ended up canceling the cabin reservation and losing the deposit, which felt awful, but there was no point keeping it when we weren't even living together. The day of our anniversary, I spent the entire evening crying on the couch, looking at our wedding album, and Biscuit kept trying to comfort me by putting his head in my lap. Even the dog could tell something was seriously wrong. About a week after my original post, I got a text from Trevor saying he wanted to meet to discuss next steps. The way he phrased it sounded so formal and cold, like he was setting up a business meeting, and my heart just sank, because I knew that meant he'd made some kind of decision. We met at a coffee shop near his office. Not the one we'd gone to before, but a different one, like he didn't want to taint another location with our problems. When I got there, he already had coffee and was sitting at a corner table looking exhausted. He had dark circles under his eyes, and he'd clearly lost weight. I sat down, and before I could say anything, he slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a list of conditions he said he needed if we were going to try to work on the marriage. I started reading and immediately felt my chest tighten because the list was extensive and some of it felt really unfair. The main points were that I had to completely stop visiting Andrew with no exceptions. I had to cut off contact with Meredith unless it was absolutely necessary. I had to do individual therapy and couples counseling. I had to give Trevor complete access to my phone and location at all times. And I had to write a detailed timeline of every interaction I'd had with Andrew, both before the accident and after, including the visits. I looked up at him and asked if he was serious about all of this, and he said completely serious, that these were non-negotiable requirements for him to even consider staying in the marriage. I said some of them seemed extreme, especially the phone and location tracking that felt like I was being treated like a criminal. Trevor said I'd violated his trust, and these were the measures he needed to feel secure again. I said I understood about stopping the visits even though it made me sad, but that cutting off Meredith seemed punitive since she hadn't done anything wrong. Trevor said Meredith was part of the whole situation, and staying in contact with her meant staying connected to Andrew, and he needed me to close that chapter of my life completely. We argued about it for over an hour, and I was crying again, which I hated, because I didn't want to seem manipulative, but I genuinely couldn't help it. I told Trevor I felt like he was trying to control me and punish me rather than actually work on rebuilding trust. He said if I thought reasonable boundaries after a major betrayal were controlling, then maybe we didn't have the same understanding of what marriage meant. I said I hadn't betrayed him, I'd just not told him about something. He said those were the same thing, and we were going in circles again. Eventually, I agreed to most of his conditions because I didn't know what else to do. I said I'd stop visiting Andrew, and I'd limit contact with Meredith to just letting her know I couldn't visit anymore. I agreed to therapy both individual and couples. I reluctantly agreed to the phone and location access even though it made me feel sick. But I pushed back on writing a detailed timeline because I said it felt like he was asking me to prove a negative, to document every single interaction to prove nothing inappropriate happened. Trevor said he needed to understand the full scope of my relationship with Andrew to process it. I said fine, but that it would take time because I'd need to really think back through 8 years of memories. We left that meeting with a tentative plan to start counseling and for Trevor to move back home in a few weeks, once he'd processed everything more. I felt relieved that divorce wasn't immediately on the table, but also anxious about all the hoops I was going to have to jump through. I called Meredith that night to tell her I couldn't visit Andrew anymore, and that conversation was horrible. She understood because I'd already explained the situation with Trevor, but she was clearly disappointed and worried about Andrew being alone more. She said she'd try to increase her visits, but with her teaching schedule, it was hard. I felt guilty, but I told myself I had to prioritize my marriage. I started individual therapy the following week with a woman named Dr. Lisa Chen, who specializes in relationship issues. I told her everything from the beginning, and she listened without judgment, which was honestly refreshing after weeks of everyone telling me I'd messed up. She asked me a lot of questions about why I'd felt the need to hide the visits, and I really had to think about it. I eventually realized that part of it was not wanting to deal with Trevor's questions or potential jealousy, but another part was not wanting to examine too closely why I was still so committed to visiting Andrew after all these years. Dr. Chen asked me if I'd ever properly grieved the loss of what could have been with Andrew, and I said I didn't think so. That the accident happened right when our relationship was developing, and then I just had to move on because what else could I do? She said that kind of unresolved grief can linger for years and manifest in ways we don't expect. She suggested that maybe the weekly visits were partially about maintaining a connection to a version of my life that got cut short, a way of not fully letting go of the person I was when I knew Andrew. That really messed with my head because I'd never thought about it that way. Meanwhile, I was working on the timeline Trevor had requested, and it was bringing up a lot of memories I'd buried. I'd forgotten how intense my feelings for Andrew had been back then, how much time we'd spent together, how much I'd thought we were heading towards something real. Writing it all down made me realize that if the accident hadn't happened, we probably would have ended up dating seriously, and who knows where that would have led. That alternate version of my life felt strange to think about now that I'm married to Trevor, but it also made me sad for what Andrew lost and what we both lost in a way. I showed the timeline to Dr. Chen before giving it to Trevor, and she said it was very thorough, maybe too thorough. She said some of the details about my feelings for Andrew might hurt Trevor more than help him understand. I said he'd asked for complete honesty, and she said there's a difference between honesty and providing ammunition for someone's worst fears. I didn't know what to do with that advice, so I ended up giving Trevor the full timeline and letting him decide what to do with it. His reaction was worse than I'd anticipated. He read through all 15 pages over the course of a few days and then called me and said he needed more time before moving back home. He said reading about how much I'd cared for Andrew and how close we'd been made him feel like he was competing with a ghost. He said even though Andrew isn't capable of being a real rival, the version of Andrew that exists in my memory clearly still holds significance for me, and he didn't know how to compete with that. I tried to tell him he wasn't competing with anyone, that I love him and chose him and built a life with him. He said if that was true, I wouldn't have hidden Andrew from him for 6 years. We started couples counseling in early December with a therapist named Marcus, which was unfortunately confusing given that's also the name of my dead coworker, but we pushed past it. The first session was incredibly tense, with both of us barely able to look at each other. Marcus, the therapist, asked us each to describe what we wanted from counseling, and Trevor said he wanted to understand why I'd betrayed him and whether I was capable of being fully honest. I said I wanted Trevor to understand that I hadn't betrayed him, I just made a mistake in not telling him about something. Marcus said those two perspectives were going to be the core of what we needed to work through. Over the next several sessions, we talked through the whole situation from every angle. Marcus helped Trevor articulate that his hurt came from feeling like he didn't really know me, like I'd presented a version of myself that was incomplete, and he'd married someone who had secret depths he wasn't allowed to access. He said every time he thought about the Thursday visits, he pictured me sitting with another man holding on to feelings from the past, and it made him feel inadequate, like he wasn't enough for me. Hearing him say that broke my heart, because Trevor has always been enough. This was never about him not being enough. I tried to explain my side, which was that the visits weren't about romantic feelings. They were about compassion and obligation and not wanting to abandon someone who'd been important to me. Marcus asked if I could see how from the outside those motivations were hard to distinguish, and I said yes, but I knew my own heart and my own intentions. Trevor said that wasn't good enough, that he needed to be able to trust my actions, not just my self-reported intentions. We went round and round on this for weeks. In one session, Marcus asked me directly if I still had romantic feelings for Andrew, and I said no. How could I, when Andrew hasn't been a real person for 8 years? Marcus said, people can have feelings for memories or ideas of people, not just the actual present-day people. He asked if I ever thought about what life would have been like if Andrew hadn't had the accident, and I admitted I did sometimes. Trevor looked like I'd stabbed him when I said that. I tried to explain that it wasn't about wanting that life, it was just natural to wonder about paths not taken, but the damage was done. That session ended badly with Trevor saying he didn't think counseling was working, and maybe we needed to accept that the marriage was over. I completely broke down and begged him not to give up, said I'd do anything to fix this. Marcus said we should table that discussion and come back the following week with cooler heads. I spent that whole week in a panic, thinking Trevor was going to ask for a divorce. The next session, Trevor came in and said he'd been doing a lot of thinking and had talked to his own therapist. Apparently, he'd started seeing someone individually too, which I hadn't known. He said he'd realized that part of his extreme reaction was his own insecurity about not being my first choice. He said he'd always known I'd dated before him, but he'd built up this story in his head that I'd never been serious about anyone before him, and that our relationship was uniquely special. Finding out about Andrew shattered that narrative and made him feel like maybe he was just the guy I settled for after the guy I really wanted became unavailable. Hearing Trevor be that vulnerable made me cry again, and I told him that wasn't true at all, that I loved him for who he is not, because Andrew wasn't available. I said I chose to be with Trevor every day of our relationship. That was an active choice, not a consolation prize. Trevor said he wanted to believe that, but the lying made it hard. Marcus asked Trevor what he would need to believe it, and Trevor said time and consistency and me being completely transparent going forward. Things were still rocky, but at least we were communicating more openly than we had in months. Trevor moved back home right before Christmas, which felt significant even though we were still sleeping in separate rooms. He'd taken over the guest room, and we were basically roommates who occasionally had intense therapy sessions together. It was awkward and sad, especially during the holidays when we usually spent time with both our families, but this year we made excuses and mostly stayed home, avoiding everyone's questions about why things felt off between us. I'd been keeping my promise not to visit Andrew, and I'd stopped texting with Meredith except for one message letting her know I couldn't be involved anymore. She'd responded kindly, saying she understood and hoped things worked out with Trevor. I thought that was the end of it, and I was trying to move forward and focus completely on my marriage. Then, in early January, everything exploded again in a way I never could have predicted. I got a call on a Tuesday afternoon from a number I didn't recognize and almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. It was a woman who introduced herself as Diane and said she was a nurse at the care facility where Andrew was. My stomach immediately dropped because I couldn't imagine why they'd be calling me. Diane said she was calling because Meredith had listed me as a secondary emergency contact years ago, and they were trying to reach me because Andrew had developed pneumonia and his condition had deteriorated significantly. She said the family had been contacted, but Meredith was out of state at a teaching conference, and Andrew's parents were asking if I could come sit with him until they could get there from Salem. I was completely frozen, not knowing what to say. I told Diane I couldn't come because of personal circumstances, and she said she understood, but that Andrew was likely not going to make it through the night, and nobody should die alone. She said if I could come even for an hour, it would mean a lot to the family. I said I'd think about it and call back. I hung up and immediately started having a panic attack because I knew if I went to see Andrew, it would destroy any progress Trevor and I had made, but I also couldn't stand the thought of Andrew dying alone. I called Dr. Chen, even though it wasn't our scheduled session time, and she called me back within an hour. I explained the situation and asked what I should do. She said this was a decision only I could make, but that I needed to be honest with Trevor about it, regardless of what I chose. She said if I went without telling him, it would be another betrayal, but if I told him and went anyway, it might end the marriage. I asked what she would do, and she said she couldn't answer that, but that I needed to think about what I could live with long term, lying to Trevor again, or not saying goodbye to someone who'd been important to me. I decided I had to tell Trevor and let him be part of the decision. When he got home from work, I sat him down and explained the phone call and that Andrew was dying. Trevor's face went through about 5 different emotions in rapid succession. He asked what I was planning to do, and I said I didn't know. That part of me felt like I should go, but I didn't want to ruin our marriage. Trevor was quiet for a long time, and then he said something I didn't expect. He said if I wanted to go say goodbye, he'd come with me. I was shocked and asked if he was serious. He said he'd been thinking a lot about why this whole situation bothered him so much, and that his therapist had pointed out he'd never actually seen Andrew or understood the reality of the situation. He'd just been imagining the worst. He said maybe if he came with me and saw that Andrew was actually just a person in a tragic medical situation, it would help him process his feelings. I said I didn't want him to feel obligated, and he said he wasn't, that he was choosing to do this because he wanted to understand this part of my life I'd kept hidden. We drove to Beaverton together that evening, and the whole drive was silent because neither of us knew what to say. When we got to the facility, I was nervous in a way I'd never been during all my previous visits, because now Trevor was going to see this whole part of my life I'd kept separate. We checked in at the front desk, and Diane came out to meet us. She recognized me from my previous visits and seemed relieved I'd come. She led us to Andrew's room and warned us that he looked worse than usual because of the pneumonia. Walking into that room with Trevor behind me was one of the strangest experiences of my life. Andrew was lying in the bed, hooked up to machines that were helping him breathe. He looked thin and pale and nothing like the vibrant person I'd known 8 years ago. Trevor stood in the doorway, just staring, and I couldn't read his expression. I went over to Andrew's bedside and took his hand, which I'd done hundreds of times before, but now felt different with Trevor watching. I said hello to Andrew even though he couldn't hear me, and told him I'd brought someone to meet him. Trevor slowly came closer and stood next to me, looking down at Andrew. He asked quietly how old Andrew was, and I said he'd be 29 now. Trevor asked what he was like before the accident, and I told him about Andrew's sense of humor and his love of hiking and how he'd always been kind to everyone he met. Trevor listened, and then he did something that made me start crying. He reached over and put his hand on top of mine where I was holding Andrew's hand. He said he was sorry this happened to Andrew and sorry that I'd lost someone I cared about. We sat there for about an hour, just keeping Andrew company. Diane checked in a few times and said Andrew's parents were stuck in traffic but should arrive soon. I told Trevor he didn't have to stay if he was uncomfortable, and he said he was fine. I asked him what he was thinking, and he said he was realizing that he'd built Andrew up in his mind as this romantic rival, when really Andrew was just a person in a tragedy And me visiting him wasn't about romance at all, it was about grief and compassion, like I'd been trying to tell him all along. Andrew's parents arrived, and I introduced them to Trevor. They'd met me many times during my visits and were grateful we'd come. Andrew's dad Robert was crying, and his mom Diane was trying to hold it together. They said Meredith was trying to get a flight back, but might not make it in time. We stayed another hour with them, and then said our goodbyes. I told Andrew I was sorry I hadn't been there the past few months, and that I hoped he'd known he wasn't alone. I don't know if any of that mattered, since he wasn't conscious, but it mattered to me to say it. On the drive home, Trevor was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet, less tense and more thoughtful. When we got home, he said he owed me an apology. I said he didn't owe me anything, and he said no he did, that he'd been so caught up in his own feelings of betrayal that he hadn't really tried to understand my perspective. He said seeing Andrew and seeing how I interacted with him and his family made it clear that this wasn't about me having feelings for another man. It was about me trying to do a kind thing for people who were suffering. He said he still wished I'd told him from the beginning, but he understood better now why the visits mattered to me. I told Trevor I owed him an apology too, that I should never have hidden the visits, and that I understood why he'd felt betrayed. I said I'd been so focused on justifying my actions that I hadn't really acknowledged the hurt I'd caused him. We stayed up late that night, actually talking for the first time in months. Not fighting or going through therapy exercises, but really talking. We talked about trust and honesty and what we needed from each other going forward. It felt like maybe we were finally getting somewhere. Andrew died 2 days later with his parents and Meredith there. Meredith texted me to let me know and to thank me for coming that last night. She said it meant a lot to her family that Andrew hadn't been alone before they got there. I asked Trevor if he'd be okay with me going to the funeral, and he said yes, that he'd come with me if I wanted. I said he didn't have to, but he insisted, said he wanted to support me through this. The funeral was small and sad, maybe 30 people total. I introduced Trevor to Meredith, and she hugged him and thanked him for bringing me to see Andrew that last night. Trevor was kind to her and to Andrew's parents, and I could see he was genuinely moved by how much they'd all been affected by this long, tragic situation. During the service, several people spoke about Andrew and who he'd been before the accident. One of his high school friends told stories that made everyone laugh and cry at the same time. I cried through most of it, and Trevor held my hand the whole time. After the funeral, we went back to Andrew's parents' house for the reception, and I spent time looking at photos they'd put up of Andrew through the years. There were pictures of him as a kid and in high school and in college, frozen in time at 21, before everything changed. Trevor looked at them with me and said it was tragic how much life Andrew had missed out on. I agreed and said that was why I'd felt compelled to visit, because it seemed wrong that someone who'd had so much potential was just lying in a facility with no one to remember who he'd really been. Trevor said he understood that now and that he was sorry he'd made me choose between honoring that and being honest in our marriage. I said I should have found a way to do both. He said we both made mistakes, and the important thing was we were working on fixing them. On the drive home, I felt lighter than I had in months, like something that had been weighing on me was finally resolved. Andrew was gone, and that was sad, but also in a strange way, it was closure on a chapter of my life that had been left open for 8 years. Over the next few weeks, things between Trevor and me slowly improved. We started sleeping in the same room again, tentatively at first, but eventually getting back to normal. We continued couples counseling, and Marcus said he could see significant progress in how we were communicating. Trevor said his trust in me wasn't fully restored, but that he was willing to work on rebuilding it. I said I was committed to being completely transparent going forward and proving that he could rely on me. We had a breakthrough session in late January where Marcus had us each write a letter to the other about what we needed going forward. Trevor's letter said he needed me to understand that secrets and lies were deal breakers for him, regardless of the intention behind them. That our marriage couldn't survive if I compartmentalized parts of my life away from him. He said he needed regular check-ins where we explicitly talked about our days and our feelings and anything that was on our minds, even small things that seemed insignificant. He said he needed to feel like my partner in all aspects of life, not just the parts I chose to share. My letter said I needed Trevor to trust that I love him and that I'm committed to our marriage, that I couldn't spend the rest of my life proving myself over and over. I said I needed him to believe that people can make mistakes without being fundamentally untrustworthy, and that my mistake with Andrew didn't define my entire character. I said I needed us to move forward rather than constantly looking back at what went wrong. Reading our letters out loud to each other in therapy was emotional, but also cathartic, and Marcus said they showed we were both invested in making things work. It's now almost the end of February, and things are better than they've been in months, though not quite back to where we were before all this happened. Trevor and I are intimate again, which was awkward at first, but has gotten easier. We're making plans for the future, talking about maybe trying to start a family in the next year or two, which we'd been discussing before all of this happened. We have date nights every week where we specifically don't talk about the Andrew situation or the counseling, just try to enjoy each other's company and remember why we fell in love. But there are still hard days where I can tell Trevor is struggling with trusting me. Sometimes he'll ask where I'm going or what I'm doing in a way that feels like he's checking up on me rather than just making conversation. I try not to get defensive because I know rebuilding trust takes time, but it's hard not to feel like I'm being monitored. The location sharing on our phones is still active, and sometimes I'll check and see that he's looked at my location, which makes me feel weird even though I have nothing to hide. Dr. Chen says this is all normal for couples recovering from a trust breach and that things will continue to get better if we keep putting in the work. She says the fact that Trevor came with me to see Andrew and to the funeral shows he's capable of empathy and understanding, which are crucial for moving forward. She also says I need to be patient with Trevor's process and not expect him to just get over it on my timeline. I'm trying to remember that, even though it's hard. My relationship with some of our friends has been affected too, which I didn't fully anticipate. Connor's girlfriend Emily apparently told some people about the situation, and it spread through our friend group. Some people have been supportive, but others have been judgmental. I overheard someone at a party last month saying they didn't know how Trevor could stay with me after I'd been sneaking around with an ex for over a year. That hurt, because it's such a reductive way to describe what was actually happening, but I also understand that from the outside, it looks bad. Shauna and I aren't as close anymore, which is sad, because she was one of my best friends. She said she's not mad at me, but that she feels weird about having been used as an alibi, and about Trevor asking her about it. I apologized again, and said I never meant to put her in that position, but she said the damage was done, and she needs some space. I'm hoping eventually we can rebuild that friendship, but right now, it's just another casualty of my bad decisions. My family has been supportive of me and Trevor, working things out. They really like Trevor and don't want to see our marriage end. But I can tell, my mom especially, is disappointed in how I handled things. She's made several comments about how marriage requires complete honesty and transparency, clearly directed at me. My dad has been more understanding, saying everyone makes mistakes, and what matters is how you fix them. My sister Amanda has been great. She's checked in on me regularly and hasn't been judgmental, which I really appreciate. Work has been challenging because I'm still distracted and emotional a lot of the time. Teresa and Denise have been supportive, but I know some of my other coworkers have heard about the situation, and I feel like they're looking at me differently. I've thought about looking for a new job where I could have a fresh start, but Dr. Chen says running away from uncomfortable situations isn't the answer, and I need to work through this where I am. I still think about the visits to Andrew sometimes, and wonder if I made the right choice in stopping them when I did. Part of me wishes I'd handled the whole thing differently from the start, wishes I'd told Trevor about Andrew early in our relationship, and then asked if he'd be okay with me visiting. Maybe if I'd done that, everything would have been fine, and I could have maintained both the visits and my husband's trust. But I can't go back and change any of it now, so there's no point dwelling on what might have been. Meredith and I exchanged a few texts after the funeral, but we haven't stayed in close contact, and I think that's for the best. She's dealing with her own grief about finally losing her brother after 8 years of limbo, and I'm dealing with trying to save my marriage. Our paths crossed for a while because of Andrew, but now that he's gone, there's no real reason for us to maintain a relationship, and I think Trevor is more comfortable with that. The thing I'm struggling with most now is forgiving myself. Everyone keeps telling me I need to stop beating myself up about what happened and focus on moving forward, but I can't stop replaying everything and thinking about how I could have done things differently. I disappointed my husband, I lost friendships, I put my marriage at risk, all because I couldn't figure out how to be honest about something that should have been simple to explain. I keep wondering what that says about me as a person, and whether I'm capable of the kind of vulnerability and transparency that marriage requires. Dr. Chen says I'm being too hard on myself, and that the situation with Andrew was genuinely complicated, not a straightforward case of right and wrong. She says most people have parts of their past that are difficult to integrate into their present, and that I was doing my best to navigate a situation that had no clear answers. She says the fact that I'm taking responsibility and working to change is what matters. I want to believe her, but it's hard when I can see the ongoing impact my choices have had on Trevor and our relationship. Trevor's parents have warmed back up to me a little bit. His mom called me a few weeks ago to check in and said she's glad we're working things out. She said marriage is hard and everyone makes mistakes, and what matters is being willing to fight for the relationship. I thanked her for giving me another chance to prove myself. His dad hasn't said much, but he's been cordial when we've seen them, which is better than the coldness from before. We're supposed to go on a trip in March, a delayed anniversary celebration to try to reconnect without all the stress of daily life and therapy appointments. Trevor suggested Hawaii, and we've booked a week on Maui. I'm nervous about it because it'll be the longest time we've spent alone together since all of this happened, and I'm worried we'll run out of things to talk about, or that the forced togetherness will bring up issues we've been avoiding. But I'm also hopeful that maybe getting away will help us remember what we have together and why it's worth fighting for. Marcus says in our last session that he thinks we're ready to move to every other week for counseling instead of weekly, which feels like progress. He says we've done a lot of good work in therapy, and now we need to practice applying it in our regular lives. Trevor seemed pleased about that and said he feels like we're in a much better place than we were a few months ago. I agree, but I'm also aware that trust is fragile and it would be easy to damage it again if I'm not careful. I've been thinking a lot about what I learned from this whole experience, and I guess if I had to summarize it, I'd say that intentions don't matter as much as I thought they did. I had good intentions with the visits to Andrew. I was trying to be compassionate and help someone in need, but the way I went about it caused real harm to my marriage. I've learned that in a relationship, you can't just do what you think is right. You have to consider how your partner will perceive and be affected by your choices. And you definitely can't keep secrets, even secrets that seem harmless. Because once trust is broken, it's incredibly hard to rebuild. I've also learned that I'm not as good at communication as I thought I was. I always prided myself on being honest and straightforward, but clearly I have blind spots when it comes to difficult conversations. I avoided telling Trevor about Andrew because I didn't want to deal with his potential reaction, and in doing so, I created a much bigger problem than if I'd just been upfront from the beginning. That's something I'm working on in individual therapy, understanding why I avoid certain types of confrontation and how to push through that discomfort to have necessary conversations. The whole experience has made me question a lot of things about myself and about what I want from life. Before all this, I thought I had everything figured out. Good job, good marriage, good friends, comfortable life. Now I realize how fragile all of that is and how quickly things can fall apart when you make bad choices. I'm trying to be more intentional about everything, more present in my marriage, more honest in my friendships, more aware of how my actions affect other people. It's exhausting, but I think it's making me a better person, even though I wish I'd learned these lessons in a less painful way. I still miss the simplicity of before, when Trevor and I were just happy and didn't have all this baggage. Sometimes I look at him and I can see he's thinking about everything that happened, and it kills me that I put that weight on him. But other times, I look at him and I can see love and commitment and willingness to work through hard things together, and that gives me hope that we're going to be okay. We're not the same couple we were a year ago, and we'll never be that innocent again, but maybe we can become a stronger couple because we've been through this and survived it. So that's where things stand now. We're healing slowly and imperfectly, but we're moving in the right direction. I don't know if I'll ever fully stop feeling guilty about what happened, but I'm trying to channel that guilt into being a better partner going forward. Trevor deserves someone who is completely honest with him, and I'm committed to being that person, even though it's harder than I expected it to be. If anyone reading this is in a similar situation where you're keeping something from your partner because it seems too complicated to explain, please learn from my mistakes and just tell them. The temporary discomfort of a difficult conversation is nothing compared to the long-term damage of broken trust. I'm cautiously optimistic about our future together, and I'm grateful that Trevor was willing to fight for our marriage instead of just walking away. Not everyone would have given me that second chance, and I don't take it for granted. I'm going to spend the rest of our marriage making sure he never regrets choosing to stay and work through this with me. That's all I can do at this point, is move forward and be better and hope that eventually the hurt will fade and we'll be left with just the love we've always had for each other. Stories number 6. My husband wanted kids more than he wanted me, so I made him believe I couldn't have them. I never thought I'd be the kind of person who could lie about something so huge, but here I am, 3 years after my divorce, finally ready to admit what I did because the guilt is eating me alive, and I need to get this off my chest before it destroys me completely. I met Daniel when I was 24, and he was 27. We worked at the same marketing firm in Seattle, and honestly, it was one of those instant connection things that you read about in books, but never think will happen to you. He was charming and funny, and had this way of making me feel like I was the only person in the room, even when we were at a crowded office party. We dated for 2 years before he proposed on a hiking trip to Mount Rainier, and I said yes without hesitation because I genuinely thought he was the love of my life. We got married 6 months later in a small ceremony with just our closest friends and family, and for the first year, everything was absolutely perfect. The problem started about 18 months into our marriage when Daniel brought up having kids during a casual dinner at home. I'd always been on the fence about children. I liked the idea of them in theory, but I wasn't sure I actually wanted to give up my career and my freedom and my body for motherhood. When I told him I wasn't ready yet, he seemed understanding and said we had plenty of time. But then he started bringing it up more and more frequently. First once a month, then once a week. Then it felt like every single day he was making some comment about babies or pointing out cute kids at the grocery store or sending me articles about the benefits of having children before 30. It got to the point where I dreaded coming home from work because I knew he'd find some way to steer the conversation towards starting a family. We'd be watching a movie and he'd pause it to talk about how great it would be to watch movies with our kids someday. We'd be at a restaurant and he'd comment on how the booth would be perfect for a high chair. I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of his expectations, and no matter how many times I tried to explain that I needed more time to think about it, he just wouldn't let it go. The real turning point came about 2.5 years into our marriage when we went to visit his older brother Marcus and his wife Jennifer, who had just had their second baby. The entire weekend was torture because Daniel spent every single moment cooing over the baby and volunteering to change diapers, and basically acting like being an uncle was his life's greatest calling. On the drive home, he told me point blank that he wanted to start trying for a baby immediately and that he'd already been patient enough waiting for me to be ready. When I said I still wasn't sure, he actually pulled the car over on the side of the highway and we had this massive fight where he accused me of leading him on and wasting his time and not being honest about what I wanted from our marriage. That's when I realized something that made my blood run cold. Daniel didn't actually love me for who I was. He loved the idea of me as the mother of his children. If I couldn't or wouldn't give him kids, I was basically useless to him. The way he looked at me during that fight was like I'd betrayed him in the worst possible way, and I knew right then that our marriage was never going to survive this fundamental incompatibility. But I also knew that if I just told him I didn't want kids, he'd spend years trying to change my mind or convince me or wear me down until I gave in just to make him happy. And I couldn't live like that. So I came up with a plan that I'm not proud of, but at the time felt like my only option to get out of the marriage without years of fighting and resentment. I made an appointment with my gynecologist, Dr. Patterson, and explained the situation. Not the whole truth, obviously, but I told her I was having some irregular periods and wanted to get checked out. She did some routine tests, and everything came back normal. But when I got home, I told Daniel that the doctor had found some concerning issues and wanted to run more tests. He was immediately supportive and caring, which honestly made me feel even worse about what I was doing, but I was already committed to the lie. Over the next 3 months, I invented an entire medical journey, complete with fake appointments and fake test results. I'd leave the house saying I was going to the fertility clinic, when really, I was just going to a coffee shop to sit alone for a few hours. I'd come home looking sad and defeated, and tell Daniel that the doctor still didn't have answers. I even went so far as to create fake medical documents using templates I found online, printing them out on fancy paper to make them look official. The document said I had severely diminished ovarian reserve and that my chances of conceiving naturally were less than 5%. When I showed Daniel the fake results, he cried. He actually sat at our kitchen table and cried like someone had died, and I had to comfort him while feeling like the worst person on the entire planet. He asked if we could try IF or adoption or surrogacy, and I told him the doctor said IF wouldn't work with my specific condition and that adoption and surrogacy were options, but they'd be expensive and difficult. I could see his mind working through all the possibilities, trying to find a way to still get what he wanted, and I knew I needed to push him toward the conclusion I wanted him to reach. So I started pulling away emotionally. I stopped initiating sex, and when he initiated, I'd make excuses about being tired or stressed. I stopped making effort with my appearance around the house. I stopped asking about his day or planning date nights or doing any of the little things that had kept our relationship feeling connected. I made myself into someone he could fall out of love with, and it worked. Within 6 months of the fake diagnosis, Daniel was distant and cold and clearly unhappy. He started working late more often and going out with friends instead of spending time with me, and I encouraged it because I wanted him to realize on his own that our marriage was over. The divorce conversation happened almost exactly 3 years into our marriage. Daniel sat me down one evening and said he thought we should separate, that he still cared about me, but he couldn't imagine a future without children, and he didn't think it was fair to either of us to stay in a marriage where we wanted such different things. I agreed immediately. Maybe too immediately because he looked a little surprised, but he didn't question it. We agreed to a no-fault divorce and split everything down the middle. He kept the house because he made more money and could afford the mortgage, and I moved into a small apartment across town. The divorce was finalized 4 months later, and I felt this enormous sense of relief mixed with crushing guilt. I was free from a marriage that was making me miserable, but I'd achieved that freedom through an elaborate lie that had probably broken Daniel's heart. I told myself it was justified because he'd been pressuring me and not respecting my feelings about motherhood, but deep down, I knew I'd done something really messed up. For the first year, after the divorce, I kept a low profile. I focused on my career and made some new friends and tried not to think too much about Daniel or what he was doing with his life. Then about 18 months ago, I ran into his friend Tyler at a Starbucks downtown, and we ended up chatting for a few minutes. Tyler mentioned that Daniel had started dating someone new, a woman named Sarah, who apparently worked as an elementary school teacher and loved kids. I felt a weird pang of jealousy even though I had no right to, but mostly I felt relieved that Daniel was moving on and would hopefully get the family he'd always wanted. But then 6 months ago, I saw something on social media that made my stomach drop. I'd unfollowed Daniel on everything after the divorce, but we still had mutual friends, and one of them posted a photo from a wedding shower. In the background of one of the pictures, I could clearly see Daniel with a woman I assumed was Sarah, and she was very obviously pregnant. My first reaction was happiness for him, like good for him for finding someone who could give him what he wanted, but then I started thinking about the implications. What really sent me into a spiral was running into Daniel himself at a grocery store about 3 months ago. We literally turned the corner into the same aisle at the same time, and there was no avoiding each other. He was polite but cold, asked how I was doing in that way people do when they don't actually care about the answer, and I said I was good and asked about him. He told me he was getting married in 2 months to an amazing woman who was pregnant with their first child, a boy, and he'd never been happier. The way he said it felt pointed, like he was rubbing it in my face that he'd moved on and found someone better, but again, I had no right to be upset about it. What's been killing me, though, is that I've started having these thoughts about what my life could have been like if I'd just been honest with Daniel from the beginning. If I told him straight up that I didn't want kids and let him make the decision about whether to stay or go, would we have ended up in a better place? Maybe we would have divorced anyway, but at least it would have been based on truth instead of lies. Maybe I would have realized during couples therapy or something that I actually did want kids, and I was just scared. Maybe I robbed both of us of the chance to work through our issues like adults instead of me manipulating the situation to get what I wanted. The guilt has gotten so bad lately that I've been having panic attacks and trouble sleeping. I keep imagining Daniel finding out somehow that I lied about being infertile. Like, what if he runs into Dr. Patterson somewhere and mentions my condition and she has no idea what he's talking about? What if one of the mutual friends we still have somehow finds out the truth and tells him? What if years from now I actually do get pregnant with someone else and word gets back to him? The thought of him discovering the lie makes me feel physically sick because I know how much it would hurt him and how betrayed he would feel. Part of me wants to come clean and tell him the truth, but what would that accomplish besides making him hate me and potentially destroying his new relationship? He's about to be a father, he's clearly moved on with his life, and dredging up the past would be purely selfish on my part to ease my own guilt. But keeping this secret feels like it's poisoning me from the inside out, and I don't know how to live with what I've done. I've also started questioning my own choices about motherhood, because seeing Daniel so happy about becoming a father has made me wonder if I gave up something precious without really thinking it through. I'm 30 now, and while that's not old by any means, I can feel the window closing on certain life choices. What if I actually do want kids someday, and I threw away a marriage to a man who loved me because I was too scared or selfish to try? What if the problem wasn't Daniel's pressure, but my own inability to commit to anything that required sacrifice and vulnerability? My therapist keeps telling me that I need to forgive myself and that people make mistakes in relationships all the time, but this doesn't feel like a normal relationship mistake. This feels like a fundamental betrayal of trust, a lie so big that it shaped the entire trajectory of both our lives. Daniel is building a family with someone else, based partly on the belief that I couldn't give him children. And if he ever finds out the truth, it would undermine everything he thinks he knows about our marriage and why it ended. I've also been thinking about the ethical implications of what I did beyond just how it affected Daniel. By faking a medical condition, I was trivializing the real struggles that people with infertility face. People who would give anything to have the choice that I had. I was using their pain as a cover for my own dishonesty. And that feels disgusting to me now, in a way it didn't seem to at the time, when I was desperate to escape the marriage. The worst part is that I can't even talk to anyone about this in real life, because admitting what I did would mean risking Daniel finding out. Our social circles still overlap somewhat, even though we're not in direct contact. And Seattle can feel like a small town sometimes, where everyone knows everyone. So I'm stuck carrying this secret alone and hoping that time will make the guilt fade, but so far, it's only gotten worse. Sometimes I fantasize about writing Daniel a letter explaining everything, not to ask for forgiveness, because I don't deserve that, but just to give him the truth. But then I imagine him reading it while his pregnant wife is in the next room, and I realize how selfish and destructive that would be. He's happy now, he's getting what he always wanted, and my confession would serve no purpose except to make me feel better temporarily while potentially ruining his life. I guess what I'm really struggling with is whether I'm a terrible person or whether I just made a terrible choice in a bad situation. Does the fact that Daniel was pressuring me about kids excuse the way I handled it? Or does nothing excuse lying about something that significant? If I had it to do over again, would I make the same choice? Or would I find the courage to just be honest, even if it meant a harder divorce? I honestly don't know the answer to any of these questions, and that uncertainty is almost worse than the guilt. What's really been messing with my head lately is that I've started dating again, and every time I meet someone new, I wonder if I'm capable of being honest in a relationship. If I could lie to Daniel about something so fundamental, what else am I capable of lying about when the truth becomes inconvenient? Am I doomed to repeat this pattern of manipulation and dishonesty, or was this a one-time thing born out of desperation and immaturity? My therapist says I've grown a lot since the divorce, and that recognizing what I did wrong is the first step toward making better choices, but I'm not convinced. I've thought about reaching out to Daniel's brother Marcus, who I was actually pretty close with during the marriage, not to tell him what I did, but just to get a sense of how Daniel is really doing. But that feels like another manipulation, like I'd be inserting myself back into Daniel's life in some indirect way when I have no right to know anything about him anymore. He's moved on, and I need to respect that and stay away, even though part of me desperately wants to know if he ever thinks about me or if he's completely erased me from his memory. The practical side of my brain knows that I need to just accept what I did, learn from it, and move forward with my life. The emotional side keeps playing these scenarios where everything comes crashing down and Daniel finds out and everyone I know learns what I did, and I become this cautionary tale about dishonesty in relationships. I wake up sometimes in the middle of the night in a cold sweat thinking about all the ways the truth could come out. And then I have to remind myself that it's been 3 years, and if Daniel hasn't found out by now, he probably never will. But is living with this secret for the rest of my life really better than facing the consequences of telling the truth, even if those consequences would be severe? I genuinely don't know, and I'm terrified that I've made a choice that's going to haunt me forever, no matter what I do. If I tell him now I'm the villain who lied, and then confessed years later when it no longer mattered, except to ease my own conscience, if I never tell him I'm the villain who lived a lie and took the cowardice way out, either way, I'm the villain in this story, and I have to somehow find a way to live with that. What I do know is that I can never do anything like this again. The cost to my mental health and my sense of self has been way too high. Whatever happens in my future relationships, I have to commit to being honest, even when it's hard, even when the truth might mean losing someone I care about, because this guilt is worse than any breakup or divorce could ever be. I just hope that wherever Daniel is right now, with his new wife and his baby on the way, he's genuinely happy, and that my lie hasn't caused him any lasting damage beyond the pain of the divorce itself. I don't expect anyone reading this to absolve me or tell me what I did was okay, because it wasn't okay by any measure. I just needed to finally tell someone the truth about what happened, even if it's just anonymous strangers on the internet who will probably rightfully judge me. Maybe writing this all out will help me process it better, or maybe it'll just confirm what I already know, that I did something unforgivable and I have to find a way to live with that for the rest of my life.